Hey friends! Glad you're here at Super Harry. We've cooked up something special. What if Fawkes burned every block on Harry at age 7 and Goblin Healers found Dumbledore's 52-year manipulation plan? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, Phoenix Fire. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4 Privet Drive was exactly 3 feet wide and 6 feet long. Harry Potter had measured it once using his own body, lying flat, arms stretched above his head, heels touching the door. He'd been 5 then, small enough that his fingers didn't quite reach the back wall. At 7, they did. He knew the smell of it the way you know a smell that has soaked into your bones: dust, old wood, the particular damp of a space that never saw sunlight. He knew the exact pitch of the creak in the 3rd stair above his head, the one that told him Uncle Vernon was coming down for his midnight kitchen raid. He knew how to go very still, very quiet, very small. He'd been practicing that since before he could remember. Tonight was his birthday. He knew this because Dudley had said at dinner, loudly and with great satisfaction, "You're 7 today and you still sleep in a cupboard." Aunt Petunia had shushed him, not because it was unkind, but because Dudley had sprayed mashed potato when he said it. Harry lay on his thin mattress in the dark and thought about the word 7 the way you think about a word until it loses all meaning. He was 7. It didn't feel like anything. It didn't feel like anything was supposed to feel different, and yet some part of him, the part that lived behind his ribs and occasionally made things happen that he couldn't explain, that part was restless tonight in a way it had never been before. He pressed his hand flat against his sternum, as though he could quiet it. Outside, Privet Drive was perfectly, aggressively silent. The Dursleys had gone to bed an hour ago. The neighbors were all asleep. The street lamps cast their orange sodium light through the slats of the cupboard door in thin lines across Harry's threadbare blanket. Then one of those lines of light changed color. Harry went still, stiller than the Dursley on the stairs, still, the deeper kind, the kind where you aren't sure if you're breathing. The orange light had shifted, imperceptibly at first, towards something warmer. Something that wasn't sodium and wasn't ordinary and wasn't anything he had a word for. It moved the way firelight moved, but slower, and with a quality that made the hairs on his arms lift not in fear but in something closer to recognition. He heard the sound a moment later. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a soft, sustained note, the kind a singing bowl makes if you run a wet finger around the rim, hanging in the air somewhere above his cupboard door. Harry sat up. The light was definitely gold now. Real gold, the color of late afternoon in summer, slipping through the slats with a warmth that should have been impossible for light. It lit the dust motes in the air so they looked like sparks. The cupboard door swung open. Harry hadn't touched it. He hadn't moved at all. But the latch clicked, the hinges shifted without complaint, and the door opened onto the Dursleys' hallway, which was filled, absolutely, impossibly, gorgeously filled, with golden light that came from a bird. The bird was on fire. Not dangerously. Not the way a thing looks when it is being destroyed. It was fire the way a sunset is fire, the way a forge is fire, beautiful and purposeful and ancient. The bird was roughly the size of a large eagle, but nothing about it suggested the clipped precision of an eagle. It was all flowing lines, tail feathers that trailed behind it like a comet, wings that beat slow and steady, pushing warm air that smelled like cedar and something cleaner than anything in that house had ever smelled. Its eyes were amber and they were looking directly at Harry with an intelligence that made him feel, for perhaps the first time in his life, that he was being genuinely seen. Harry looked back at it and didn't scream. He wasn't sure why. Any reasonable 7-year-old would have screamed. But the thing behind his ribs, the restless thing, had gone completely quiet, the way a dog goes quiet when its owner finally comes home. The bird, the phoenix, though Harry didn't have that word yet, tilted its head. Made that sound again, the singing bowl note, and this time Harry felt it in his chest, felt it resonate against his sternum like his ribs were a bell being struck. It landed on his forearm. The weight of it was surprising, solid, real, warm through his pajama sleeve. Talons that should have been sharp gripped him with extraordinary gentleness. The phoenix looked at him for one long moment, and then it opened its beak, and the light coming off it shifted from gold to something white-hot at the center, and it sang. Not the single note. Something longer. Something that built and widened, that pressed into every corner of the hallway and soaked into the walls and found Harry at its center, and Harry felt it move through him the way heat moves through cold hands, starting at the surface and working its way down, layer by layer, until it reached something deep and frozen that he hadn't known was frozen. Then it burned. It didn't hurt. That was the thing he would remember most clearly, afterward. It didn't hurt the way he'd expected fire to hurt. It hurt the way a cramped muscle hurts when it finally releases, the sharp, awful, necessary pain of something that has been held wrong for too long finally being let go. He felt things breaking inside him, and the breaking was relief, each crack like a gasp of air after being held underwater. Something heavy that he'd been carrying in his head without knowing it was there came apart like wet paper. Something that had been sitting on his chest, not weight exactly, more like a blanketing sense that he should be quiet, small, unremarkable, invisible, peeled away from him in layers, and where each layer went, he felt more awake than he'd been in his entire life. He didn't realize he was crying until he felt the tears on his face. Not sad crying. Not the kind he'd taught himself not to do years ago. Something else entirely, the kind that happens when something has been wrong for so long that right feels overwhelming. The phoenix sang for what might have been 3 minutes or might have been an hour. When it stopped, the silence was different. The house was the same. The carpet under his feet was the same worn beige. The coat hooks on the wall held the same Dursley coats. But Harry Potter was not the same person who had sat in the cupboard 20 minutes ago, and he knew it with a certainty that had nothing to do with thought. He looked at his hands. They looked ordinary. But he raised one of them and thought light, not as a word exactly, more as a concept, a want, and a small flame appeared in his palm. Clean white gold, steady, no larger than a candle flame. He hadn't done anything. He'd barely even tried. The flame just came, the way a word comes when you've always known it and someone finally teaches you to say it aloud. He closed his hand and it went out. The phoenix stepped off his arm and hovered in place, regarding him with those amber eyes, and Harry said, "You're Dumbledore's, aren't you?" He didn't know how he knew this. He just knew it the way he suddenly knew a great many things that felt like they'd always been there, behind glass, visible but unreachable. Fawkes. The phoenix made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite disagreement, something more complicated, something that said I am my own, but yes, I know that man. Why? Harry asked. Fawkes sang one short note. Harry felt it as a feeling rather than an answer, something like because it was wrong, because it has always been wrong, because you deserve better than this, and the burning behind his eyes got worse for a moment before he blinked it back. Okay, he said. He sounded very calm for a 7-year-old standing in his relative's hallway at midnight talking to a burning bird. Okay. What do I do now? Fawkes spread his wings once, slowly, and then launched himself upward and straight through the ceiling without leaving so much as a scorch mark. The golden light in the hallway faded by degrees until it was just the ordinary darkness of an ordinary house on an ordinary street where nothing extraordinary had ever happened, except that it had, and Harry Potter could feel the truth of every single lie that had kept him small humming in his bones like a struck chord. He stood in the hallway for a moment, feeling the night air of the house around him. Then he went to the kitchen, turned on the light, found a piece of paper and a pen in the drawer Aunt Petunia kept for grocery lists, sat down at the table like he owned it, because something in him now felt, quite simply, that he had as much right to this table as anyone, and began to write. He wasn't entirely sure who he was writing to. He just knew that somewhere, there were people who dealt with things like what had just happened to him. And he knew, with the clear-water certainty of someone whose mental fog has just been burned completely away, that those people needed to know about it. All of it. Not just tonight. Everything, the suppression, the compulsions, the layered charm work that he could now feel the shape of, the ghost impressions of it still mapped against his nerves like sunburn. He wrote, my name is Harry James Potter. Something has been done to me. I need someone to check. He stared at the words. Added, I know about the blocks. I could feel them go. I think there were a lot of them. He added the address. He signed his full name. He didn't know how to send it. He stared at the envelope for a moment, tapping the pen against the table. Then he thought send, the way he'd thought light, and the envelope lifted off the table, angled itself toward the kitchen window, which cracked itself open an inch, and slid through the gap into the night. Harry watched it go, folded his arms on the table, put his head down, and slept. In Gringotts Bank, deep beneath Diagon Alley, the monitoring wards that tracked the 17 ancient and noble magical bloodlines in Britain lit up at 12:43 in the morning. The ward stone for House Potter had been flickering since the night of October 31, 1981, a low, irregular pulse that the goblins had flagged and then been magically compelled to ignore, a compulsion that had frustrated the ward masters for years without their ever being able to identify why they kept setting aside the report. At 12:43 on July 31, 1987, the ward stone didn't flicker. It blazed, a column of white gold light that shot to the ceiling of the monitoring chamber and held there, singing, while every compulsion on every goblin who had ever touched the Potter file dissolved simultaneously like salt in rain. Grip Hook, who was junior ward monitor that night and therefore had the misfortune of being present, stared at the pillar of light for approximately 4 seconds before he crossed the chamber in 6 running strides and pulled the emergency cord. The bell that cord rang had not been rung in 31 years. Ragnarok, King of Gringotts and High Director of Goblin Affairs in Britain, was awake within the minute. He was old, by goblin reckoning, ancient, with hands like knotted wood and eyes the color of old amber that missed nothing and forgave less. He stood at the entrance to the monitoring chamber in his sleeping robes, took in the pillar of light, looked at Grip Hook, and said, in gobbledygook, who cleared those compulsions? Phoenix Fire, High Director, Grip Hook said. The signature is unmistakable. Old magic. Voluntary. Voluntary, Ragnarok repeated. He looked at the pillar of light for a long moment. The phoenix acted on its own. Yes, sir. Which means the phoenix judged it necessary. Ragnarok crossed the chamber and placed his palm flat against the ward stone, and the light flowed around his hand, and he felt it, felt the full magnitude of what had been done to the Potter heir, felt the layering of it, the precision of it, the years of it. He was silent for a very long time. Then he said, quietly, get me the full audit team. I want the Potter vault records on my desk before sunrise. Every transaction, every contract, every access log going back to November 1981. I want everything. He paused. And I want the compulsion breach documented. Every goblin who was affected, every report that was filed and set aside. I want names and dates. Yes, High Director. And, Grip Hook. Ragnarok's voice was very even. Don't tell the ministry. Don't tell Dumbledore. Don't tell anyone. This goes through goblin channels only until I personally authorize otherwise. Grip Hook nodded with the particular gravity of someone who understands exactly how serious a thing they have just been handed. Understood, High Director. Ragnarok looked once more at the pillar of light, still blazing, still steady, the magical signature of Harry Potter burning free and true for the first time in 6 years. He thought about what that meant. About the compulsions that had kept his own people from doing their jobs. About the careful, comprehensive nature of the magic that had suppressed a child for 6 years. Someone very powerful, he said to himself, not to Grip Hook, has been very busy. He went to get dressed. By the time the sun came up over Privet Drive, Harry had been awake for 3 hours. He'd slept at the kitchen table until just past 4, woken with a crick in his neck and a feeling of extraordinary clarity, and spent the remaining pre-dawn hours systematically dismantling several things about his life that he was no longer willing to accept. Not dramatically. Just practically, the way you reorganize a room once you can see it clearly. He moved his mattress out of the cupboard and into the smallest bedroom, the one Dudley used for storage, that was technically the second bedroom. He piled Dudley's overflow toys against one wall with brisk efficiency. The mattress went against the opposite wall. It fit. It was a small room, but it was a room, with a window, and Harry stood at that window and watched the sunrise over the identical rooftops of Privet Drive and felt the morning light on his face and thought about all the mornings he had done exactly this from a crack in the cupboard door, and the feeling that moved through him wasn't grief exactly. It was something colder and more useful. He was 7 years old. He was very, very angry. But the anger was clean, nothing like the formless, frightened anger that used to rise and make things happen accidentally, the anger that had always felt out of control. This was different. This felt like a tool. Like something with an edge he could direct. He heard Vernon Dursley's alarm go off at 6:30. He heard the creak of the master bedroom door, the familiar tromp on the stairs, the kitchen light going on. He heard the sounds of the full English breakfast preparation begin, because Dursley kept to his routines like a man keeping to a life raft. Harry waited until he heard the sizzle of bacon before he came downstairs, walked into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and said, "Good morning, Uncle Vernon." Vernon Dursley had the particular coloring of a man whose blood pressure was always 10 points too high, and it climbed another 5 points now as he turned from the stove and found Harry sitting at the table with the look of someone who had every right to be there. "What are you doing in here?" "Sitting," Harry said. "I live here." Vernon turned fully around, spatula in hand, and the look on his face was the usual look, the one that combined contempt and wariness and the low-grade fear he never quite admitted to, but Harry watched it go through several rapid changes as he registered something different about the boy in front of him. He couldn't have said what it was. Harry hadn't changed physically. He was still small, still in his overlarge pajamas, still wearing broken glasses held together with tape. But there was something in the way he held himself, no forward tuck, no reflexive shoulder curl, no looking at the table instead of the room. He was looking directly at Vernon. Vernon Dursley had not been looked at directly by Harry Potter in as long as either of them could remember. "Go to your cupboard," Vernon said. "I'm sleeping in the second bedroom now," Harry said. "I moved this morning. There's plenty of room. Dudley doesn't use it for anything except storing toys he never plays with." The spatula went down. Vernon's face got very purple, very fast. "Now, listen here, boy." "No," Harry said. "Just the word, nothing attached to it, no flinch, no qualifier, no softening. Just no, flat and calm and certain as a stone wall. I moved my things this morning. I'm keeping the room. You can tell Aunt Petunia if you want. Tell Dudley, too." He paused. "I'd like some breakfast, please." Vernon stared at him for a long time. Something in Harry's face, or possibly something in the air around him, a faint warmth that hadn't been there yesterday, made him pick the spatula back up. He didn't say anything else. He put a plate down, very stiffly, and when Petunia came downstairs and looked between them with her sharp, bird-like eyes, Vernon said, "He's eating with us," in a tone that closed the subject. Petunia looked at Harry, looked at the room, noting the open window from last night, probably, noting the piece of paper on the counter that Harry had written on, and said nothing. Just tightened her mouth and began making tea. Small victories. But Harry had a feeling that today was going to be full of them. The owl arrived at 10:15. Not the letter Harry had sent, he hadn't expected a response from that particular missive so quickly. This was a different owl, a large and clearly official one with a Gringotts seal on the letter it carried. Harry brought it inside, ignoring Aunt Petunia's strangled sound at the sight of an owl in her kitchen, and opened it at the table. The letter was in the precise, formal script of Goblin legal correspondence. It read, "Dear Mr. Potter, Gringotts Bank has detected an anomalous magical event associated with your family vault and personal magical signature. As heir to the ancient and noble house of Potter, you are required under Goblin Contract Law, Clause 7.4, Magical Inheritance and Heir Protection, to present yourself at Gringotts for a full inheritance audit at your earliest convenience. We strongly advise that this matter be treated with urgency. Your vault manager will be present. Transportation will be provided upon reply. Yours in business, Ragnarok, High Director Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley. Harry read it twice. Then he looked up at the owl, which was waiting with the patience of a creature that knew its job was not done. He found another piece of paper, wrote "I'll come today if possible." "How?" and handed it back. The owl took it, ruffled its feathers in what might have been approval, and was gone before Aunt Petunia could complain about it again. The reply came back in 12 minutes. It was a single card with the Gringotts seal embossed in gold, and it said only, "Place your hand on this card. Transportation arranged." Harry placed his hand on the card. The kitchen at number 4 Privet Drive folded away. He had a brief, vivid impression of Aunt Petunia's scream, and then there was a rushing sensation that was nothing like anything he'd felt before, not the wobbly feeling of accidental magic, not the sick drop of falling, but something more like being moved at enormous speed through a place that wasn't quite space, and then the sensation resolved, and he was standing on the polished stone floor of a vast, marble-columned hall that could only be Gringotts. The goblins behind the counters didn't look up. Goblins never looked up at new arrivals, it was beneath them. But a figure emerged from a side door immediately, a goblin dressed in formal grey robes, shorter than Harry but radiating an authority that filled the room more comprehensively than Vernon Dursley's bulk ever had. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. "I am Ragnarok. Come with me." The room Ragnarok led him to was nothing like the grand public hall of the bank. It was small and deep underground, lit by crystal sconces, with walls lined floor to ceiling in filing shelves of a dark metal Harry didn't recognize. In the center of the room was a table, and on the table was a crystal basin, and around the basin were gathered 5 goblins whose combined ages were probably older than Britain. They all looked at Harry when he came in. Ragnarok gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, please." Harry sat. He took in the room with the attentive, undefensive look he'd developed about 3 hours ago and found he liked the feel of it, how much more he noticed when he wasn't spending energy on being small. "Do you know why you're here?" Ragnarok asked. "The letter said an anomalous magical event," Harry said. "I think that's me. Something happened last night. A phoenix burned away significant magical interference placed on your person," Ragnarok said. No preamble, no cushioning. Harry appreciated this immediately. "Our ward stones detected it. When the interference cleared, we were able to access information that had been magically suppressed, our own information, about your vaults and accounts, that we should have been able to access for the past 6 years. Someone made you forget my accounts. Someone compelled our ward masters to consistently overlook anomalies in your file," Ragnarok said. The precision of his voice didn't quite hide what was underneath it, which was fury, very old and very well controlled. "This is a significant crime under goblin law. More significant, perhaps, than under wizarding law, which has proved," he paused briefly, "unreliable." "What's in my file?" Harry asked. Ragnarok looked at him for a moment. There was something in the old goblin's face, a measuring quality, as though Harry was a gemstone being assessed for cuts and inclusions. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. He turned to one of the other goblins, who slid a thick leather portfolio across the table. "Your inheritance audit," Ragnarok said. "We completed it this morning. I will walk you through the major points." Harry pulled the portfolio toward him and opened it. The first page was a list of assets, properties, vault contents, investments, that was longer than anything he could have imagined, and the second page was a list of withdrawals, regular, substantial, going back to November 1981, and the names attached to those withdrawals hit him like cold water. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Monthly. 6 years. Petunia Dursley. Quarterly. 6 years. A vault had been opened in his name at a bank he didn't recognize, with a balance he couldn't fully process, and the authorized accessor was listed as Albus Dumbledore with a notation, per magical guardianship established November 1, 1981. Dumbledore made himself my guardian. Harry looked up. Without a Wisengamot hearing, without contacting any of your living magical relatives, without the standard notification to Gringotts, Ragnarok said. Illegally, in short. Under Goblin law, at minimum. Under several provisions of wizarding inheritance law as well, though as I said, wizarding law has been somewhat flexible in its application where Dumbledore is concerned. My parents had a will, Harry said. He could feel it suddenly, not a memory exactly, more like the shape of something he'd known and had taken from him. They had a will and there were other people named in it. There was a will, Ragnarok confirmed. It was sealed within 12 hours of your parents' deaths. The sealing was authorized by, you can see the name at the bottom of page 4. Harry turned to page 4. Dumbledore, he said. Flatly. The will named Sirius Black as your primary guardian. It named several secondary options. It explicitly stated that you were not to be placed with the Dursley family under any circumstances. Harry read that line twice. Under any circumstances. He thought about 6 years in a cupboard. He thought about the thing behind his ribs that had been restless and trapped and slowly being smothered. He thought about the precise, deliberate effort it would have taken to override his parents' stated wishes, to seal a will, to compel goblins to look away, to layer charm after charm after charm on a child. Who is Sirius Black? He asked. Your godfather, Ragnarok said. Currently imprisoned in Azkaban. He was sent there without a trial. The room was very quiet. Without a trial, Harry repeated. No trial, no official hearing, no formal charges processed through the Wisengamot. He was committed directly to Azkaban custody. And Dumbledore was chief warlock of the Wisengamot at the time, Ragnarok said. And is currently supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards and headmaster of Hogwarts School. He has considerable influence over the mechanisms that might normally correct such an oversight. Harry closed the portfolio. He put his hands flat on the table. He looked at Ragnarok and Ragnarok looked back at him and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then Harry said, how much of this is documented? All of it, Ragnarok said. Goblin records are not subject to ministry interference. We have the vault access logs, the guardian authorization, the sealed will, all of it preserved in our ledgers, which are legally admissible under both Goblin and Wizarding law. He paused. We also have something else. He nodded to the goblin on his left, who opened a second, smaller case and removed from it a crystal vial containing what looked like compressed silver smoke, a pensive memory, stored under preservation seal. One of our ward masters, once the compulsion was lifted, was able to reconstruct the magical architecture of the interference placed on your person. It took the form of a full diagnostic impression. What it shows is a layering of spells, emotional suppression, loyalty compulsions, instinctive magic dampeners, several charms specifically designed to create a psychology of submission and self-abnegation, placed on an infant, and refreshed regularly for 6 years. The word infant in that sentence did something to Harry that he was going to need to deal with later, alone, somewhere he wasn't being watched. But not now. Can you identify who cast them? The magical signatures on the initial casting are consistent across all spells, Ragnarok said. We have the signature on file. It matches Albus Dumbledore. The crystal sconces in the wall flickered slightly. Harry realized, distantly, that this was because his hands had tightened on the table and something had happened in the air around him, not loud, not violent, just a very clear and focused pulse of magic that moved outward from him like a breath, like a held thing finally being exhaled. Okay, Harry said. His voice was perfectly steady. I want to understand everything. Show me all of it. Ragnarok looked at him with those amber eyes. Something moved in the old goblin's face that might, on a less controlled face, have been called respect. All of it, he confirmed. And they began. The audit took 6 hours. Harry sat in that underground room with the goblins and read and asked questions and listened and occasionally had to put a document face down on the table and breathe through something that wanted to be a much larger feeling before he could continue. He did not cry in front of Ragnarok. Not because he was suppressing it, the suppression was gone, burned away, but because what he was feeling wasn't grief. It was something colder and more structural. He was taking inventory. He was building a picture. He was being thorough. The full scope of it expanded as the hours went on, and by the end of the afternoon, what Harry had was this: his parents had died because someone had leaked their location to Voldemort. The likely leak was Peter Pettigrew, who was the actual secret keeper, not Sirius Black, who had been a deliberate false trail. Sirius Black had gone after Pettigrew in grief and fury, caught him on a public street, and Pettigrew, a talented wizard in the specific area of transformation magic, had faked his own death, severed his own finger, killed 12 people with a single misdirected curse, and transformed into a rat before Sirius could stop him. Sirius Black had been left at the scene of the explosion, laughing, not with joy. The witnesses had misread it. With the specific, horrible laughter of someone who has just watched their best friend apparently destroy himself and escape justice. Sirius Black was innocent. Without a trial, he had been in Azkaban for 6 years. The money flowing from Harry's vault to Dumbledore had been authorized under a magical guardian clause that Dumbledore had written into the guardianship documents himself, documents that, if placed before an uncorrupted Wizengamot, would be immediately invalidated. The payments to Petunia Dursley were separate, a quarterly stipend that had been going to the Dursley household and which the Dursleys had presumably known about and accepted, meaning they had been, in a sense, paid to keep Harry small and frightened. The charm work on Harry's person was the most extensive part of the documentation and the most difficult to sit through. Ragnarok walked him through the Goblin Wardmaster's reconstruction with clinical precision, each charm, what it was designed to do, when it had been refreshed. Magical suppression. Emotional suppression. A loyalty tether that would have made Harry predisposed to trust Dumbledore instinctively, without question. A specific charm, one the Wardmaster had identified with visible distaste, that was designed to create a consistent internal sense of worthlessness. Not dramatic, not crushing. Just enough to ensure that Harry would never fully believe in his own right to resist instructions, to question authority, to demand better. 6 years of that. Starting at 13 months old. By the end of the audit, Ragnarok closed the last file and looked at Harry across the table. Outside this underground room, the bank had gone through a full business day and closed. It was evening. "Mr. Potter," Ragnarok said. "You are 7 years old. You have the right, under magical inheritance law, to appoint a wizarding advocate to act on your behalf until you reach legal majority. You have the right to contest every action taken under the fraudulent guardianship. You have the right to request emergency emancipation proceedings given the documented abuse and magical interference." He paused. "I will tell you plainly that Gringotts has its own interest in this matter. What was done to our wardmasters was a violation of Goblin sovereignty. We want accountability for that." "So do I," Harry said. "Our interests align, then." "Yes." Harry looked at the pile of documents on the table. "I want Sirius Black out of Azkaban. That's my first priority." Ragnarok studied him. "That will require a Wizengamot hearing. Which requires navigating a system that Dumbledore has significant influence over." "I know," Harry said. "I'll need help." "You said I can appoint an advocate." "A wizarding advocate, yes. Someone with Wizengamot standing." Harry thought for a moment. He thought about what he'd read in the documentation, the names of people who had tried to flag anomalies in the Potter case, who had asked questions that were deflected, who had filed complaints that went nowhere. One name had come up twice. "Who is Augusta Longbottom?" Ragnarok's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "An interesting choice. Lady Longbottom is one of the few members of the current Wizengamot who has been consistently resistant to Dumbledore's influence. Her son and daughter-in-law were tortured into insanity by Death Eaters shortly after your parents' deaths. She has reason of her own to be dissatisfied with how certain aspects of that case were handled. Can you contact her? I can send a communication through Gringotts channels. Off the Ministry grid." "Please do," Harry said. He looked at the crystal vial with the diagnostic memory. And I want a copy of that. Everything, actually. I want my own copies of all of this. Of course. Ragnar looked at him across the table with an expression that Harry was going to catalogue later, in the quiet of the new bedroom with the window, and identify as the look of a very old, very canny creature acknowledging the existence of someone who may genuinely be worth the trouble. There is one more thing. Given the documented violations and the fraudulent guardianship, you are no longer legally required to reside at number 4 Privet Drive. Gringotts can provide secure accommodation pending the resolution of your case, if you wish. Harry looked at the pile of documents. Looked at his hands. Thought about Privet Drive and the cupboard and Petunia Dursley's thin, careful silence and the quarterly stipends and 6 years of deliberate diminishment. Yes, he said. I'd like that very much. Across Britain, Albus Dumbledore was sitting in his office at Hogwarts, and his lemon drop had gone untouched in his hand for 12 minutes, which was unusual. He had felt it the moment it happened, felt the burning of his own charm work, felt the specific, searingly unmistakable signature of Phoenix fire, and known immediately what it was. He had stood up from his desk and then sat back down, and Fawkes's empty perch had mocked him from the corner, and he had sat there for 12 minutes trying to calculate the damage. The wards at Privet Drive were gone. That was manageable, possibly, he could rebuild them, though not without Harry's presence, and Harry's presence was something he would need to engineer carefully given that if the Phoenix fire had done what it appeared to have done, the boy would be significantly more alert than he was supposed to be. He reached for his mirror. Stopped. If Harry was more alert, then anything he did through standard wizarding channels might be noticed, might be logged, might be. He thought about Gringotts and the ward stones there and the compulsions he had placed on the wardmasters 6 years ago and felt, for the first time in many years, something very much like fear. It lasted only a moment. Albus Dumbledore had been handling impossible situations for 52 years. He would handle this one. He picked up the mirror. Severus. It took a moment. Then Snape's face appeared in the glass, sharp-featured and guarded as always. Headmaster. I need you to go to Privet Drive. Tonight. Tell me if the boy is still there. Snape looked at him with those flat dark eyes for a moment. Has something happened? A minor precautionary check, Dumbledore said, and his voice was the voice of a man who had been warm and reassuring for so long it had become indistinguishable from his actual warmth. If you would, Severus. The mirror went dark. Dumbledore set it down and looked at the empty perch. The candles in his office burned low and steady. On his desk, behind the stack of summer correspondence, the silver instruments that monitored certain magical children in Britain ticked and turned, and the one connected to Harry Potter was spinning so fast it was nearly a blur. Dumbledore looked at it for a long time. He had made a calculation, 52 years ago, when he was a younger man facing an impossible war and the prophecy of a boy not yet born. He had made the calculation and it had seemed not merely necessary but right, the cold arithmetic of sacrificing one for many, but done carefully, kindly, the boy not broken but shaped, not harmed but prepared, and wasn't preparation a form of kindness? He had told himself this story for 6 years. He would continue to tell it. He put out the candle on his desk and watched the darkness settle. Somewhere, a 7-year-old boy was awake and clear-eyed and in possession of every truth that had been kept from him, and Albus Dumbledore steepled his fingers beneath his chin and thought, very carefully, about what came next. The answer, as always, was, control the narrative. He just needed to be faster. That night, in a room deep under Gringotts that smelled like stone and old gold, Harry Potter lay on a cot that was not his but was clean and had 2 blankets and a proper pillow. The lights were crystals set into the wall, and they dimmed when he thought dim, going down by degrees until the room was soft and almost dark. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and felt the full sweep of the day like weather, big and rolling and real. He was angry. He was going to be angry for a long time. He had made a conscious decision not to rush into that anger, not to do something fast and satisfying that would make the next steps harder. He was 7. This was going to be a long game. He understood that with a clarity that felt older than 7, and he suspected that was partly the phoenix fire and partly just who he was when no one was sitting on top of him. He raised his hand in the dark and thought light, and the flame appeared, steady and clean. He thought about his parents, who had loved him and made a will and tried to protect him. He thought about a man laughing on a street in grief while a rat ran into the sewers. He thought about a very old wizard in a very high office who had looked at a baby and made a calculation. He closed his hand. The flame went out. "Okay," Harry Potter said to the dark, and his voice was very quiet and absolutely certain. "My turn." Chapter 2, The Ledger of 52 Years. The morning came through the crystal sconces in the walls of Harry's room at Gringotts in a way that had nothing to do with the sun. The crystals simply brightened, gradual and even, the way a careful person would wake someone up, not the lurch of an alarm, not Aunt Petunia's sharp knock, just light increasing by degrees until Harry's eyes opened on their own. He lay still for a moment, taking inventory of himself. This was something he'd started doing yesterday and it already felt like a habit worth keeping. Physically, fine. Better than fine, actually. His body felt less like something he was dragging around and more like something that belonged to him. The suppression magic had apparently taken a toll he hadn't known to notice. Without it, he felt like he'd been wearing a coat 3 sizes too small for 6 years and had finally taken it off. Emotionally, the anger was still there. Good. He wanted it there. Anger with edges was useful. He just needed to make sure it stayed a tool and not a fire. He got up, found that someone had left clean clothes on the chair by the door, goblin-sourced, perfectly fitted, nothing like Dudley's cast-offs, and dressed. Thought light as he did it and held a small flame in one hand out of something between practice and sheer enjoyment of the fact that he could. The flame responded to his mood, he'd noticed. Right now it burned steady and blue-white, cooler than yesterday. Focused. He went out to find Ragnarok. The Goblin King was already in the audit room when Harry arrived, and he was not alone. Seated across from Ragnarok was a woman who made Harry stop in the doorway for a moment and reassess his immediate surroundings. Augusta Longbottom was, at a conservative estimate, formidable. That was the word that presented itself, and it was accurate in the way that calling the ocean wet is accurate, technically true but missing the full force of the thing. She was tall for a woman and sat like someone who had never in her life slumped, with the rigid carriage of a person who considered posture a moral position. Her hair was steel gray and pinned severely. On her head she wore a hat that appeared to have a full stuffed vulture on it, which should have been absurd and somehow wasn't. Her eyes were the sharp, pale gray of a November sky, and they moved to Harry with an attention that was nothing like the assessing look adults usually gave him, not sizing him up for use or placement, but the kind of attention that says I am taking you seriously and I am waiting to see if you deserve it. "Mr. Potter," she said. Her voice was a cello, deep and precise. "Lady Longbottom," Harry said, which felt right, and from the slight shift in her expression, was right. He came in and sat down across from Ragnarok, which put him beside Augusta Longbottom. He had the portfolio from yesterday in front of him already, he'd brought it from his room, and he put his hands flat on it. Ragnarok looked between them. "I've given Lady Longbottom a summary of yesterday's findings," he said. "All of it?" Harry asked. "Enough," Augusta said. She had a way of compressing words that suggested she never used 2 syllables where one would do. "I've been independently aware of several irregularities in the Potter case since 1981. I had no avenue through which to pursue them." The slight tightening around her eyes conveyed what she thought about that without requiring elaboration. "I now have documentation. And an interested party with standing." She looked at Harry. "If you appoint me as your wizarding advocate, I have the Wisingamot access necessary to begin proceedings. Do you understand what that means?" "It means you speak for me in wizarding legal spaces," Harry said. "And anything you do officially is done in my name, so if Dumbledore tries to block it he's blocking a 7-year-old orphan with documented magical abuse in his history." Augusta Longbottom looked at him for a long, still moment. "Yes," she said. Precisely that. Another pause. How old are you? 7. You reason like someone considerably older. The Phoenix fire cleared out a lot of things, Harry said. I think clear thinking was one of them. He picked up the quill from Ragnar's desk. Where do I sign? The advocate agreement was 3 pages of tight legal script that Harry read fully before signing, because he was done with signing things he hadn't read, or more precisely, he was done with the version of himself that had never been given things to read at all. Augusta watched him read without impatience, which told him something about her. When the ink dried, it glowed briefly gold and then settled. Harry felt something shift slightly in the magical architecture around him, a new tether, this one chosen and clean, nothing like the compulsions that had been burned away. Good, Augusta said. She opened her own portfolio on the table, older than Harry's, the documents inside clearly from her own files. Now. Your first priority was Sirius Black. Still is, Harry said. I agree with the priority. Black's imprisonment is one of the cases I flagged 6 years ago. Without a trial, the commitment is legally invalid under the Wisengamot's own charter. She turned to a document and pushed it across the table to him. The problem is that calling for a hearing requires a Wisengamot member to table the motion, which I can do, but it will be visible. Dumbledore will know within hours. That's fine, Harry said. Augusta looked at him. He will attempt to control the hearing. I know, Harry said. But he'll be trying to control a hearing that's been tabled with full Gringotts documentation attached. Let him try. He met her eyes. He's had 52 years of controlling things quietly. I'd rather drag this into a room where there are witnesses. The November sky eyes sharpened. You want him defensive. I want him explaining himself to people who can vote, Harry said. Ragnar, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone watching a particularly good game of chess, made a sound that might have been a cough. There is an additional consideration, he said. Before any Wisengamot action, we should complete our examination of the full scope of the Potter estate interference. Yesterday we covered the major points. There are elements we did not reach. He paused. Elements that are more, architecturally significant. Harry looked at him. Meaning? Ragnar opened a drawer in his desk and removed a second portfolio, this one sealed with a dark red wax impression that Harry didn't recognize. What we found yesterday was the management of your material circumstances, the vault access, the guardianship fraud, the placement. These are serious. What we found this morning, while completing the full audit, is something else. He broke the seal on the portfolio. We found the plan. The room was quiet. Outside, somewhere in the deep corridors of Gringotts, the bank went about its business, the distant clank of cart tracks, the murmur of transaction voices. In here, nothing moved. Show me, Harry said. What Ragnar spread across the table over the next 2 hours was not, strictly speaking, a single document. It was a collection of evidence, magical contracts, enchanted correspondence that had been flagged by Gringotts' ward stones, memory extracts from goblins who had been compelled and who, once free of the compulsion, had been very willing to give full accounts, and the audit trail itself, which told a story through numbers and dates as clearly as any written plan. It told this story: 52 years ago, Albus Dumbledore had been a rising power in British wizarding politics. He had already defeated Grindelwald. He had already become the dominant figure in international magical affairs. He had begun to understand that the wizarding world's relationship with power was a cycle. Dark Lords rose, were defeated, and the structural conditions that created them remained unchanged, ensuring they would rise again. He had begun, with the meticulous care of a man who believed himself to be thinking very long thoughts, to design a solution. The solution had several parts. The first was the establishment of the Order of the Phoenix, a network loyal not to Ministry or Wisengamot but to Dumbledore personally. The second was the careful cultivation of influence over every major wizarding institution in Britain. The third, The part that was documented here, in contracts and correspondence and the cold arithmetic of ledger entries, was the management of the final stage of the cycle. Because Dumbledore had known, decades before Voldemort rose, that something like Voldemort was coming. He had seen the signs in Tom Riddle, had seen them and made a calculated choice. And the choice he had made was not prevention. The choice was management. Let the Dark Lord rise, let him be defeated, but ensure that the defeat happened on Dumbledore's terms, at Dumbledore's timing, and produced a wizarding world that was more thoroughly dependent on Dumbledore's guidance than it had been before. The prophecy, when it came, when Sybil Trelawney spoke it in a pub in Hogsmeade, had fit neatly into the plan. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. Born as the seventh month dies. The problem with prophecies, as Dumbledore had noted in a letter to an unknown correspondent dated July 1980, was that they required a subject who was willing. A child who believed in his own power, who had strong allies, who understood the full scope of what Voldemort was. Such a child might not make the choice that the prophecy required. The necessary sacrifice. So the child needed to be prepared differently. Shaped. Not broken. Dumbledore had written this in the careful hand of a man arguing with himself. Not broken, the boy needed to be functional and brave and good, but shaped toward a specific psychological outcome. A boy who understood self-sacrifice as the natural conclusion of love. A boy who had been taught, from the earliest possible age, that his own life was less important than the lives of others. A boy who would, when the moment came, walk into death willingly. 6 years of charm work. 6 years of calculated diminishment. 6 years of the Dursleys and the cupboard and Petunia's quarterly payments and the careful, layered architecture of a child being shaped into a willing sacrifice. There was a note at the end of the correspondence file, dated October 1981. It was brief. It said, "The Potters have been found. The process begins sooner than anticipated. The protections at Godric's Hollow must be allowed to appear sufficient without being so. The boy must survive. Everything else is acceptable loss." Harry read that line 4 times. The room was very still. He was aware of Augusta Longbottom sitting beside him, and he could feel without looking that she had gone very rigid, not the controlled posture of before but something tighter and colder. Ragnock sat opposite with his hands folded, watching Harry with the patient attention of someone who has delivered bad news before and knows that the work of it takes time. Harry put the letter down. He looked at his hands. The flame was still there, he hadn't let it go out, and it had changed. It wasn't the cool blue-white of this morning. It was deep gold and it was very, very steady. Not agitated. Not wild. Just burning. He knew, Harry said. He knew about the betrayal. He let them find my parents. That is what the documentation suggests, Ragnock said carefully. He let them die so I would have to live with the Dursleys as a specific kind of damaged. So I would grow up knowing I was worthless. So that when the time came I'd just, go, Augusta said. Her voice was flat. Not cold, not that, but the kind of flat that contains something enormous being held very tightly. Without question. Without resistance. Because he'd made sure there was no resistance left in you. Harry closed his hand. The flame went out. Not quite, he said. Something in his chest had settled into a particular, absolute clarity. He made a mistake. The Phoenix, Ragnock said. Fawkes, Harry said. Dumbledore's own Phoenix. His own familiar went against him. He was quiet for a moment. That's not nothing. A Phoenix bond that old, that deep, Fawkes had to choose this deliberately. He had to know what he was doing. Phoenixes cannot be compelled, Ragnock said. They are, by nature, immune to coercive magic. Whatever Fawkes did, he did freely. Then even Dumbledore's Phoenix thinks the plan is wrong, Harry said. He picked up the note, the October 1981 letter, acceptable loss, and looked at it one more time. Then he set it face down, deliberately, with the precise care of someone putting something away to deal with properly later. Okay. What do we do first? Sirius Black, Augusta said immediately. Sirius Black, Harry agreed. How fast can you table the motion? Today, Augusta said. The summer session is in recess, but emergency motions can be filed through the Chief Warlock's office. Which is, Dumbledore, Harry said. Dumbledore, she confirmed. Her jaw set. However, emergency motions filed with supporting documentation from Gringotts cannot be quietly shelved. They must be acknowledged within 48 hours by statute. If he tries to suppress it, the motion automatically escalates to the full Wisingamot and requires a sitting within 7 days. Then file it today, Harry said. File it with everything. The vault access logs, the guardianship documents, the will. All the documentation Gringotts has. He looked at Ragnarok. You're willing to make that documentation available? We are filing our own parallel complaint with the International Confederation of Wizards regarding the compulsion of Goblin Wardmasters, Ragnarok said. Gringotts' documentation will be available to support proceedings that serve justice in this matter, yes. The phrasing was precise. It was also, Harry understood, a political statement. Gringotts supporting Harry's case was Gringotts putting itself publicly against Dumbledore, and that was not a small thing. Thank you, Harry said. He meant it directly and without ceremony, and Ragnarok received it with a slight incline of the head that communicated, in its goblin way, the same. Augusta left to file the motion at 11 in the morning. Ragnarok went to prepare Gringotts' documentation for formal release. Harry was left in the audit room with the pile of portfolio material and the particular quiet of underground stone, and he sat with it all for a while. He thought about the note. Acceptable loss. He turned the phrase over the way you turn a sharp thing, feeling for all the edges. What struck him most was not the callousness of it, though that was there, cold and absolute, but the confidence. The blithe certainty that this was a decision Dumbledore had the right to make. The assurance of a man who had been so powerful for so long that the distinction between I have decided and this is right had ceased to exist for him. Harry thought about the charm that had been specifically designed to create worthlessness. Worthlessness. Someone had sat down and constructed a spell whose entire purpose was to make a baby feel like less than a person, and had then carefully, periodically maintained that spell for 6 years, which meant periodically visiting a child in a cupboard and making the deliberate choice to keep him small. He thought about the warmth of Dumbledore's public persona, the twinkle, the lemon drops, the careful, grandfatherly performance of benevolence, and understood now exactly what it was for. A man performing kindness at scale as armor. As the story that made everything else not just acceptable but noble. Dumbledore was kind to hundreds of people. He had saved thousands of lives. He had done genuinely good things in the world, probably, and he had done them in the same hands that had written acceptable loss about a 13-month-old boy. Harry didn't hate him. He recognized this with mild surprise and then understood it. There wasn't room for hate in the space where hate should be, because that space was occupied by something more structural. Not cold, exactly. Just clear. What Dumbledore had done required dismantling, thoroughly and publicly and completely, and Harry was going to do it, and the motivation for doing it didn't require hate. It just required clarity of purpose. He raised a hand and drew a small flame and let it run across his knuckles the way a coin runs across a skilled person's fingers, back and forth, steady and controlled. A knock at the door. He let the flame go and said, "Yes." A young goblin appeared, not Griphook, a different one, with the formal livery of a junior clerk. "Mr. Potter. There is a visitor requesting entrance to Gringotts. He is at the public entrance and has given his name as Albus Dumbledore. He is requesting to speak with you and with Director Ragnarok." Harry looked at the closed audit room door for a moment. Then he said, "Tell Director Ragnarok. And tell him yes." He picked up the portfolio from the table. "I'd like to use a different room, though. Not this one. Something that feels more official." The goblin's eyes moved to the portfolio. The formal negotiation chamber, perhaps. It is where Gringotts conducts treaty discussions. Perfect, Harry said. The formal negotiation chamber was exactly what a room called the formal negotiation chamber in a goblin bank should be, which is to say, it had been designed with the specific intent of making visitors feel the full weight of what they were dealing with. The ceiling was high enough to be vaguely unsettling. The table was ancient, black stone, and very long. The chairs were carved from the same stone and deeply uncomfortable if you were human proportioned. The walls held relief carvings of significant goblin battles and treaties going back to the 9th century, rendered in the direct goblin artistic style that did not soften what happened in battles and was therefore somewhat alarming. Harry sat at one end of the long table, not the middle, the end, the seat that said "This is my room." He put the portfolio in front of him. He waited. Ragnarok came in first, took the chair to Harry's right, and said nothing. He had changed into formal robes. The message of this was not subtle. Then Albus Dumbledore walked in. Harry had never seen Dumbledore. He'd known the name, everyone knew the name, even children at Muggle schools somehow knew the name Dumbledore the way you know the name of a thing that belongs to a world adjacent to yours, but he'd never had a face for it. Now he did. Dumbledore was tall, with the long silver beard and half-moon spectacles that appeared in every portrait of him Harry had ever glimpsed. He wore deep blue robes with gold trim. He moved with the ease of a man completely comfortable taking up space, which Harry recognized and catalogued. His face was, this was the thing, genuinely warm. Not performed. Genuinely warm, the way a fire is genuinely warm, and just as capable of burning you if you got too close. The blue eyes behind the spectacles held that famous twinkle, and it moved to Harry the moment he walked in the door, and it was kind. It was genuinely, remarkably kind, and Harry understood exactly what it was for, and sat very still under it. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was everything his face promised, warm, deep, certain. The voice of someone who had been the most reassuring person in every room they'd ever entered. "My dear boy." "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. His own voice was even and polite. "Please sit down." Something moved in Dumbledore's face, something quick and quickly controlled, a fractional adjustment. He'd expected, Harry could read it clearly, he'd expected a child. Not this child. Not someone who said please sit down at a formal negotiating table with the calm surety of someone who had every right to run this meeting. Dumbledore sat, 3 chairs down from Harry's end of the table. He looked at Ragnarok, at the portfolio, at Harry. The twinkle dimmed slightly, not extinguishing but recalibrating. "I'm glad you're safe," he said. "I was concerned when I felt the disturbance at Privet Drive last night. The disturbance was your phoenix burning 6 years of compulsion charms off me," Harry said. "I think disturbance is a fairly modest word for it." The twinkle recalibrated again. "Harry, I understand this must be very frightening and confusing." "It isn't, actually," Harry said. "I've had a day to go through everything, and it's quite clear." He put his hand on the portfolio. "I have the full audit documentation from Gringotts. The vault access records, the fraudulent guardianship authorization, the sealed will, and the magical diagnostic from the wardmasters documenting the spellwork placed on my person." He watched Dumbledore's face as he listed these. The warmth didn't leave, Dumbledore was too skilled for that, but something behind it shifted, very subtly, into a different gear. "I also have the correspondence files. Including the letter from October 1981. Silence. Ragnarok looked at his folded hands with the satisfaction of a man watching a thing unfold exactly as he predicted. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed, still warm, but with a new quality underneath, something more considered. Like a chess player taking the board seriously for the first time. "You've been thorough." "I had help," Harry said. "Lady Longbottom is filing an emergency motion with the Wisengamot today for a trial hearing. For Sirius Black." "Harry." Dumbledore's voice shifted again, into something lower and more direct. More honest, in a way that made it more dangerous. There are things in this situation that are more complicated than they might appear from a set of documents. I know this is difficult to hear, but there are reasons, important reasons, for the choices that were made. I know what the reasons are, Harry said. The prophecy. The sacrifice. The willing death. He kept his voice perfectly level. You decided, when I was an infant, that the best outcome for the wizarding world was for me to grow up exactly broken enough to not resist being killed. Dumbledore went very still. You had my parents' location leaked, Harry said. You sealed their will. You had Sirius put in Azkaban without trial. You placed yourself as my illegal guardian, drew funds from my vault, paid my aunt to keep me miserable, and put a specific charm on me designed to make me feel worthless. He stopped. I've read the October letter. I know what acceptable loss means. The room was extraordinarily quiet. Dumbledore's face was, and Harry watched this carefully, not the face of a man caught in wrongdoing. It was the face of a man who has held a very heavy thing for a very long time and who is now faced with the specific exhaustion of having to explain why the weight was worth carrying. There was guilt in it, yes. But more than guilt, there was a bone-deep conviction, the conviction of a man who had talked himself into the arithmetic of this 52 years ago and had been living inside it ever since. The prophecy, Dumbledore began. Don't, Harry said. Not loud. Not rude. Just final. I'm not interested in the justification. I'm interested in outcomes. He opened the portfolio to a marked page. First. Sirius Black. He is innocent. You know he's innocent. The Gringotts documentation demonstrates that you were aware of Peter Pettigrew's role. The hearing is happening. I need you to understand that if you attempt to block it, obstruct it, or otherwise interfere, the full documentation goes to every member of the Wizengamot, the ICW, and the Daily Prophet simultaneously. Gringotts has arranged the distribution mechanism. Dumbledore looked at him over the half-moon spectacles with an expression that Harry was going to spend a lot of time thinking about later. It was the expression of a man encountering something he has planned for meticulously and miscalculated completely. Second, Harry continued. The fraudulent guardianship is void. I am not returning to Privet Drive. Lady Longbottom is pursuing formal dissolution and will be named as my acting magical guardian pending emancipation proceedings. Emancipation, Dumbledore said. A single word, testing the air. I'm going to be 11 in 4 years, Harry said. In 4 years I go to Hogwarts. Gringotts has agreed to hold my case until then, at which point I am legally an attending student of an accredited wizarding institution and the guardianship question becomes largely moot. He paused. I'm told that at Hogwarts, students are entitled to change their head of house at the start of first year if they have documented cause. I'm also told that the headmaster's authority over student welfare is significant, but not absolute. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I want you to know that I'm aware of all of this. I want you to know that I will be attending Hogwarts in 4 years and that I will not be arriving as what you planned for me to be. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The warmth in his face had settled into something more complicated, still there, still genuine in some foundational way, but with a quality now of an old man looking at something he has caused and is only now fully seeing. Harry, he said, and the name sounded different. Quieter. I have made choices that, I believe were necessary. I still believe they were necessary, in ways that are difficult to, I know you do, Harry said. I don't think you're a cruel person. I think you're a person who made a terrible decision a very long time ago and then spent 50 years making it worse to justify the first one. He said this without inflection, as a statement of fact. That doesn't make it better. It makes it more understandable, which isn't the same thing. The silence after that was a specific kind of silence, the kind that exists after something true has been said by someone who had no reason to be kind about it. Dumbledore looked at his hands. Then he looked at Ragnarok. Then back at Harry. What is it you want from me? I told you what I want, Harry said. Don't obstruct the black hearing. Dissolve the illegal guardianship without legal contest. And stay away from me. Not because I'm afraid of you, he added, but because every time you're near me you'll be tempted to manage the situation, and I'm done being managed. Dumbledore stood slowly. He was very tall. In the dim light of the chamber, with the carved bas-reliefs behind him, he looked like what he was, a man who had carried enormous power for an enormous time and who was now, for the first time in many years, in a room where that power had clear limits. He looked at Harry one more time. The look had something in it that wasn't pity and wasn't admiration and wasn't guilt exactly, but was all three things at once, braided together. You are more like your parents than you know, he said softly. Good, Harry said. Dumbledore left. The moment the chamber door closed, Ragnarok looked at Harry with the first fully unconcealed expression Harry had seen on his face. It was somewhere between satisfaction and astonishment. You're 7 years old, Ragnarok said. So everyone keeps telling me, Harry said. He picked up the portfolio and closed it. His hands were very steady. Under the table, he'd been pressing his feet flat against the stone floor the whole time, grounding himself, because his heart had been going considerably faster than his voice suggested and he was not going to let Dumbledore see that. But Dumbledore was gone now, and he let himself breathe. The motion is filed, Ragnarok said. Lady Longbottom sent a message 20 minutes ago. The documentation went in with the emergency motion. It will be acknowledged before tomorrow. Good. Harry set the portfolio down. What's Pettigrew's status? Do we know where he is? Ragnarok's expression sharpened. We know he is alive. Beyond that, tracking is difficult. He is in rat form, which makes standard magical tracing ineffective. He paused. However, we have one lead. The Weasley family has a pet rat. The family acquired the rat approximately 6 years ago. The pause again, precise and deliberate. The Weasleys are blood traders by pureblood standards, meaning they have limited social protections. If we were to find a reason to request a welfare inspection of their residence, we're not sending anyone to the Weasleys to rip apart their house, Harry said. They didn't do anything wrong. They have a pet. He thought about it. But we could flag it. If there's a hearing for Sirius, and if we can identify the rat as Pettigrew, we have physical proof. Not just the circumstantial evidence in the documentation. A transformation registry check would identify any long-term unregistered animagus, Ragnarok said. 3 of the 4 known marauders were unregistered animagi. If we file a petition for a mandatory animagus registry audit, which is within Gringotts's authority as a matter of wealth management, the Potter estate held funds managed under a registered animagus clause, Harry said, following the thought. My father was Prongs. Padfoot is Sirius. And the 3rd marauder, is on record at Hogwarts as one Peter Pettigrew, Ragnarok finished. Who died on November 1, 1981, and whose death record, under audit, contains a number of irregularities. Harry looked at him. How irregularities? The death was filed without a body, Ragnarok said. The finger was noted. The explosion was noted. The body was not recovered. Under standard wizarding death registration law, a body-absent death certificate requires a 30-day waiting period and a second ministry confirmation. He spread his hands. No confirmation was filed. So Pettigrew's death certificate is fraudulent, Harry said. Under Goblin's law, it is certainly incomplete, Ragnarok said. Which means we can file a petition for re-examination of the death record. Which would require the ministry to either produce evidence of death or reclassify Pettigrew as a missing person. He let the implications settle. And a missing person with an active animagus registration, which Pettigrew does not have, but which can be retroactively flagged through the Marauders' Hogwarts records, creates a legal framework for the animagus registry audit, Harry finished. Which would force any unregistered animagus into the open. He thought about it. It won't happen fast enough for the black hearing. No. But if the hearing establishes the reasonable doubt, and the audit subsequently identifies Pettigrew, the case resolves completely. Then we do both, Harry said. File the petition for Pettigrew's death record re-examination today. Separately from the black hearing so it doesn't look like we're trying to prop one up with the other. Ragnock looked at him with that amber-eyed steadiness. You want them to appear independent so neither can be dismissed as supporting evidence for the other. I want them to be independent, Harry said. Because they are. One is about Sirius. One is about Pettigrew. The fact that they both happen to point in the same direction is just, the truth. Ragnock permitted himself a very small smile. I have been in this business for 140 years, he said. You have been at it for approximately 36 hours. How am I doing? Harry asked. Adequately, Ragnock said, and given the source, Harry understood this was high praise. Augusta Longbottom returned to Gringotts in the late afternoon with the look of someone who has done exactly what she set out to do and is grimly satisfied about it. She came into the negotiation chamber where Harry was reviewing the Pettigrew documentation with Ragnock, took off her hat with the vulture on it and set it on the table, and said, filed. Acknowledged. Dumbledore's office received the filing at 2:17. She sat. His secretary looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Was Dumbledore there? Harry asked. He came back from Gringotts at 1:30, went directly to his office, and hasn't emerged, Augusta said. She looked at the pile of documentation on the table. He knows the shape of this now. She turned to Harry. How was the meeting? He said I was like my parents, Harry said. Augusta's expression did something complicated and briefly private. She looked at the table for a moment. Your father was reckless and brilliant, she said finally. Your mother was precise and terrifying when she wanted to be. You appear to be the latter. A pause. Both of which are inadequate descriptions of what they actually were. Harry looked at her. This was the first time anyone had spoken to him about his parents as people rather than as symbols or context, and something about it hit differently than he expected. He filed it carefully. Did you know them well? Peripherally. I was Wisengamot. They were order. She straightened slightly. I knew them well enough to understand that what was done to them was a deliberate waste of two extraordinary people. The precision in her voice had a serrated edge now. And I have been, restrained, for 6 years from pursuing that understanding, and I am very much done with being restrained. Harry thought about restraint. He thought about all the versions of the word, being held back, holding back, being held down, choosing to hold still. He thought about the charms that had been burning in him since infancy. He thought about the small bedroom with the window at Privet Drive where he'd stood watching the sunrise this morning a year ago, no, yesterday morning, it was only yesterday, and felt for the first time like himself. Can I ask you something? He said to Augusta. You can ask me anything, she said. I may not answer. Your son, Harry said carefully. Frank and Alice Longbottom. They were in the order. He waited to see if she would shut him down. She didn't, just went still in that carved stone way of hers. Who sent them to the place where they were tortured? Augusta was quiet for 5 seconds. They received information through order channels, she said, that there was a Death Eater safe house requiring immediate intervention. 3 days after you know who fell. She didn't look away from Harry's face. They went in with 4 others. 2 of those others turned back at the last moment. Frank and Alice went in. The information was bad, Harry said. It was deliberately wrong, Augusta said. Someone sent them into a trap. She paused. I was never able to prove by whom. Did Dumbledore send them? Harry asked. The silence this time was different. Heavier. Augusta's grey eyes held a quality that Harry couldn't fully read, not confirmation, not denial, something in between that was made of years of sitting with a thing you couldn't prove and couldn't let go. I don't know, she said finally. And that is the most honest thing I have ever said about it. She looked at the documentation files. But I will tell you this. When Frank and Alice were committed to St. Mungo's, and when I began asking questions about how they came to be there, the people I asked questions of in the Waisengamat started having memory difficulties with surprising frequency. She picked up her hat. I find, looking at the goblin documentation regarding compulsion magic, that this is a pattern I recognize. The room was very quiet. Harry thought about a man in a high office with a warm voice and a long plan, and about all the people that plan had chewed through over 52 years, and about the difference between collateral damage and acceptable loss, which was really just the distance between accident and intent. He said, when my case resolves, and when I'm old enough to properly pursue it, I want to look at Frank and Alice's case too. Augusta looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was something he couldn't quite name and didn't try to. She picked up her hat and put it back on, the vulture settling into its aggressive angle. When you are old enough, she said, I will be standing right next to you. That evening, 3 things happened. The first was that the Waisengamat officially acknowledged Augusta Longbottom's emergency motion and scheduled a hearing in 5 days, the fastest scheduling permissible under the statute. The documentation requirement forced the hand, when emergency motions arrived with full Gringotts documentation attached, ignoring them became legally problematic even for the chief warlock. The second was that Dumbledore arrived at Gringotts, unannounced, and requested a private meeting with Director Ragnarok, which Ragnarok declined through his secretary without visible regret. The third was a letter. It arrived by owl at the Gringotts external mail station, addressed in handwriting that was familiar to Harry in the way things are familiar when they've been in your life but never properly introduced, a handwriting he'd seen in the letter from Gringotts's files, formal correspondence loops worn into something more personal. The letter said, Harry, I understand if you don't want contact from me. I understand if you don't know how to feel about any of this. But I need to say something before the hearing and I need to say it to you specifically and not through any intermediary. I am sorry I wasn't faster. I am sorry I trusted the wrong person. I am sorry that I was too angry and too stupid and too broken on that street to think about what would happen to you. I have had 6 years to be sorry about all of these things and I can tell you that 6 years is not long enough. I know you're doing something. I can feel it from in here, the first thing I've felt in 6 years that isn't Dementors. It feels like fire. I don't know you yet. I don't get to ask you for anything. But if you'll let me, when this is over, I would like to. Your godfather, Sirius. Harry read it sitting on the cot in his underground room, in the crystal-lit quiet of Gringotts, with the door shut and no one watching. He read it twice. Then he folded it and held it for a while. Then he found paper and wrote back, Sirius, I'm going to get you out. That's not a promise I'm making to make you feel better. It's just what's happening. 5 days. Harry, he sent it. He lay down on the cot and pulled the 2 blankets up and looked at the ceiling and thought about all the threads he'd pulled today and where each one led, and he held the letter from Sirius against his chest and felt the warmth in it, the real warmth, nothing like the manufactured warmth of Dumbledore's twinkle, just the naked and hopeful warmth of a person who had been in the dark for 6 years and had just felt fire from a distance. 5 days. He closed his eyes. In his Hogwarts office, Albus Dumbledore sat with both hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold, looking at the instruments on his desk. The one connected to Harry Potter was still spinning fast, faster than it should be for a 7-year-old, faster than it should be for anyone without decades of magical development. The Phoenix Fire had done something more than remove the blocks. It had catalyzed something in the boy, something Dumbledore recognized, distantly, with the specific terrible feeling of a gardener who has spent years stunting a tree and watched it grow anyway, taller and faster for the long frustration. He should have anticipated Fawkes. He should have. Fawkes had been growing more restless for years, and Dumbledore had attributed it to age, to the natural cycles of a phoenix, to anything except the thing it actually was, which was a deeply moral creature watching its bonded human do something unconscionable and running out of patience. He had miscalculated. He had been, and this was a truth that sat on him with the weight of long experience, arrogant. He had looked at a 7-year-old boy in a Gringotts chamber and heard his own arguments reflected back at him with perfect clarity, and the precision of it had been, not humbling, exactly. Something worse than humbling. He was used to being challenged. He was not used to being understood. The boy was not what he'd planned. He was something, Dumbledore turned the word over, better. Which was the problem? Because the prophecy remained. The structural truth of it remained. And a Harry Potter who was strong and clear-eyed and politically awake and surrounded by people who loved him rather than used him was a Harry Potter who was not going to walk willingly to his death when the time came, and the time would come, and if the boy did not go willingly, Dumbledore closed his eyes. He had been so certain, for so long, that what he was doing was right. The certainty had been load-bearing. Without it, the whole weight of 52 years shifted, and he was old, and the weight was enormous. He sat with it for a long time in the cold office with the spinning instruments. Fawkes's empty perch gleamed in the candlelight. Tomorrow, he decided, he would do nothing. He would let the hearing happen. He would let Sirius Black go free, because the boy was right, it was the right thing and he had known it was the right thing when he'd allowed it to happen and he had allowed it to happen anyway, and that truth had been sitting under everything else like a stone under deep water, and now it was at the surface. Tomorrow he would let things move. What he would do about the rest of it, about the prophecy, about Voldemort, about the arithmetic of sacrifice that he'd built his entire strategic life around, he did not know. He drank the cold tea. It tasted like nothing. He put the cup down. Somewhere deep under Diagon Alley, a 7-year-old boy who was considerably more than what he was supposed to be was sleeping with a letter on his chest. Dumbledore blew out the candle. Chapter 3, The House That Was Never Home. The Wizengamot notification arrived at Gringotts by official owl at 7 in the morning, 2 days after Augusta filed the motion. Harry was eating breakfast in the small goblin dining room off the main corridor, bread, butter, and something that tasted like smoked fish, which he decided he liked, when Ragnarok brought it in personally. The hearing was set for Thursday. 3 days away. Harry read the notification twice, put it down beside his plate, and ate the rest of his breakfast. Ragnarok watched him do this with the particular attention of someone calibrating a new variable in a long equation. "You're not celebrating," Ragnarok observed. "Not yet," Harry said. "Thursday is still Thursday. Things can still go wrong between now and then." "They won't," Ragnarok said, though the way he said it was less reassurance than assessment, a man who had arranged things precisely and was confident in his arrangements. "The documentation is too comprehensive. Even Dumbledore's influence in the Wizengamot has limits when the evidentiary weight is this substantial." "What about the Dementors?" Harry asked. He'd been thinking about this since the night before, turning it into quiet the way you work a problem that doesn't have an obvious solution. If Sirius gets a hearing, gets cleared, he's still been in Azkaban for 6 years. What does that do to a person? Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Dementor exposure at that duration and intensity causes significant psychological damage. Healers at St. Mungo's have treated former Azkaban inmates. Recovery is possible. It is not quick. He'll need somewhere safe, Harry said. Not just legally free. Actually safe, with people who, he stopped. Does he have family? Living family? His mother died while he was imprisoned. His father died in 1977. He has a cousin, Andromeda Tonks, née Black, who was disowned from the family before he was imprisoned. Ragnarok paused. She has maintained, on record, that she believes Sirius innocent. She has a daughter, Nymphadora, who is approximately 10 years old. Harry nodded slowly. Can you contact Andromeda Tonks? Before the hearing? Just to give her warning, so she has time to prepare. In case. Ragnarok studied him. You're planning for after the hearing before the hearing has happened. Someone should, Harry said. He pushed back from the table, took the notification, and went to find Augusta. Augusta was in the small office that Ragnarok had made available to her. it was spare even by goblin standards, with a single desk and a shelf of legal texts she'd brought herself, but she used it with the focused efficiency of a general using a command tent. She had 3 quills going simultaneously, somehow, in a way that Harry suspected involved a minor charm, and she was annotating a document when he knocked on the open door. "Thursday," he said, holding up the notification. She took it, read it, handed it back. "Good. Sit down. I want to walk through the hearing structure." Harry sat. Over the next 40 minutes, Augusta laid out the Wisengamot hearing process with the precision of someone who had been navigating it for 30 years and had very specific feelings about which parts of it were designed to be obstructed. The emergency hearing meant 33 members minimum, not the full 62. The motion would be presented with supporting documentation. A ministry advocate would argue the original commitment. Gringotts's representative would present the financial and magical evidence. Augusta would argue for Harry as his advocate. "And Sirius himself?" Harry asked. "Will be transported from Azkaban on the morning of the hearing," Augusta said. "He will be present. He will not be required to speak unless he chooses to, but I would prefer that he does. A Wisengamot that can see a man rather than an abstract legal argument is easier to move." "He won't be, will he be in good enough shape to speak?" Harry asked. Augusta's pen stopped for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. 6 years in Azkaban does not leave a person intact. She looked at the document in front of her. "We'll see him when he arrives. We'll adjust." Harry thought about the letter. The handwriting, which had been cramped and slightly unsteady in a way he'd noticed but hadn't mentioned. The specific phrasing of "I can feel it from in here, the first thing I've felt in 6 years. 6 years of nothing but cold and despair and the sound of your own worst memories on repeat." "I want to be there," Harry said. "At the hearing." Augusta looked up. "You understand that Dumbledore will also be there. As Chief Warlock, he has no choice but to attend and preside." "I know," Harry said. "I want to be there." Augusta looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to her document. "Dress formally," she said. The second day was prep. Harry spent most of it in the Gringotts library, a room he'd discovered down the left fork of the corridor from his room, not as large as Hogwarts's library was supposed to be but intensely organized, every volume exactly where it should be with the particular goblin neatness that was less about aesthetics and more about efficiency. He read Goblin Contract Law and Wisengamot Procedural History and a very interesting text about the history of magical inheritance disputes in Britain that had a whole chapter on fraudulent guardianship cases. He also read everything he could find about phoenixes. Phoenix lore filled several shelves in one form or another, and Harry worked through it systematically. What he learned confirmed some of what Ragnarok had said and added considerably to it. Phoenix Fire was the only magical force capable of dissolving compulsion charms at the soul level. Standard countercharms could remove individual spells, but layered compulsion architecture, built to reinforce itself, could only be fully cleared by fire that had permission. Phoenix Fire required consent at the deepest level. It burned what needed to burn and left everything else intact, which is why it didn't hurt, or not the way damage hurt. The pain was the gap where the wrongness had been. The bond. He found this in the oldest text, a manuscript that was actually handwritten on something that might have been vellum, clearly pre-printing. Phoenix bonds were not like familiar bonds. A familiar bond was made, formalized, 2 parties agreeing to connection. A Phoenix bond happened when a Phoenix chose, freely and without any human influence, to share fire. It couldn't be manufactured or requested or magically engineered. It was entirely the Phoenix's act, given because the Phoenix considered the recipient worth the gift. The result was, the text used an old word, resonance, a deep connection between the recipient's magical core and Phoenix Fire specifically. Spells came more easily, more instinctively. Magic had what the text called intent clarity, meaning the gap between what you meant and what your magic did narrow to almost nothing. And the Phoenix could, at its discretion, maintain the bond across distance, meaning Fawkes, wherever he was, had some awareness of Harry and could, in extremis, be called. Harry thought about this for a long time. Then he raised his hand and produced a flame not in his palm but hovering 6 inches in front of him, basketball-sized, and rotated it slowly, thinking about the shape of it. It changed as he thought. Went from sphere to flat disk to something longer, something that moved with the sinuous quality of an actual flame caught in air. He pulled it apart into 3 separate flames and held them in a triangle, then brought them back together. None of this felt like effort. It felt like moving his hand. He let the flame go out and went back to reading. On the 3rd day, Harry left Gringotts for the first time since arriving. Not alone, Ragnarok sent 2 goblin escorts, not because Harry needed protection but because appearing in public alone was a political statement Harry wasn't ready to make yet, and appearing with Gringotts escorts was a different and more useful statement. The escorts didn't hover or fuss. They walked slightly behind him and looked at the world with the comprehensive wariness of professionals, and Harry was free to look at Diagon Alley properly for the first time. He'd been here before, he realized. Not that he remembered it, the first 2 years of his life, before the night at Godric's Hollow, but he had some sense of the place, the same way he had some sense of magic itself, like something just below the level of memory. Diagon Alley was narrower than he'd imagined. Taller, too, the building stacked up and leaned slightly over the cobblestones as if curious about the people below. The shops were everything: cauldrons, robes, quills, creatures, books, wands in velvet-lined windows, ingredients in labeled jars. The smell of it was peculiar in the best way, herbs and metal and old wood and something ineffably magical that was probably just what concentrated human enchantment smelled like. He was not there to shop. He had a destination. Ollivander's was near the far end of the alley, narrow-fronted and slightly dusty with a single wand on display in the window. Harry stood outside it for a moment and then pushed the door open. The bell that rang was exactly the right note. The shop was deep and dim and smelled of cedar and something else, something older, and behind the counter there was nothing. No one. Then a soft step from somewhere in the towering shelves, and a white-haired man appeared with the quality of a person who has been in the same place so long they've become part of it. Ollivander had pale, silver eyes that did to Harry what no other adult's eyes had done. They looked at him without agenda. Not sizing him up, not performing warmth, not assessing his usefulness. Just looking, the way a craftsman looks at material, which was somehow more respectful than anything else Harry had encountered. "Mr. Potter," Ollivander said. His voice was soft and careful. "I wondered when you would come." "I'm not at Hogwarts age yet," Harry said. "I know. No. But you've had Phoenix fire." Ollivander's silver eyes moved to Harry's left arm, the arm Fawkes had perched on. "The bond changes things. A standard wand matching process will need to account for the Phoenix resonance in your core." He was already moving into the shelves. "This will be interesting." Ollivander's version of interesting, Harry discovered over the next hour, involved approximately 50 wands tested and rejected, 17 that reacted with varying degrees of violence, 2 that exploded outright, and 1 that produced a small tornado that knocked 3 shelves of inventory sideways before Harry shut it down. The wand that chose him was at the very back of the shop, retrieved by Ollivander from a shelf that required a ladder that the old wand maker scaled with the ease of long habit. He brought down a box that was older than most of the others, the wood slightly darker, the latch worn smooth. He opened it without comment and held it out. The wand was 11 inches, holly, with a phoenix feather core. The moment Harry touched it, the resonance was immediate and obvious, not dramatic, not flashy, just a deep, full hum of recognition, like a note finding its chord. The flame he'd been idly maintaining in his pocket, a small one, barely present, the magical equivalent of a hum, flared briefly to full brightness and settled. "Holly and phoenix feather," Ollivander said, looking at Harry with those silver eyes. 11 inches. Flexible. He paused. "The phoenix who gave the feather for this wand gave only 2 feathers. This is one. The other, I sold it many years ago." He paused again. To Tom Riddle. Harry looked at the wand in his hand. Brother Wands, he said. You know the lore, Ollivander said. I've been reading, Harry said. What does it mean for me? Ollivander studied him. It means that when you and the other wand's owner meet, and you will meet, that is not in question, there will be effects that neither standard magic nor standard combat fully prepares for. He folded his hands. It means that the wand chose you anyway, which tells you something about the nature of the choice. Harry paid for the wand from his personal vault account. A goblin runner had arranged this the day before, and walked out of Ollivander's with the wand in a new case under his arm and the sense of something clicking into its proper place. He stood in the middle of Diagon Alley in the afternoon light with his 2 goblin escorts and thought about what he was and what he wasn't and what he was going to be. Then he said to the nearest escort, "Do you know if there's a decent bookshop?" He bought 12 books. He had them sent to Gringotts rather than carry them, because he had one more stop. The leaky cauldron was dim and smelled of old ale and recent cooking, and the few customers inside were the slow afternoon sort who were mostly interested in their own drinks. The barkeep, Tom, presumably, who had the look of a man who had been polishing the same glasses since before Harry was born, spotted him immediately and the glass he was polishing went still. "Mr. Potter," Tom said. "Like Ollivander, without performance. Just recognition." "I need to send a private flu message," Harry said. "Not ministry logged." "Is there a private grate?" There was. Tom had it behind a door at the back with the slightly theatrical quality of a man who keeps useful things in obvious places because the kind of people who need them know where to look. Harry crouched in front of the low grate, took the powder Tom handed him, and said, "Longbottom Manor." The flame went green, and a face appeared in it, not Augusta, but a boy's face. Round, slightly surprised, with the look of someone who had not been expecting a fluke connection and had been doing something else entirely. Harry recognized him, though they'd never met. The documentation from Gringotts had included a secondary file, because the ward stones, once the compulsion was cleared, had flagged something they should have flagged years ago. Neville Longbottom's magical signature had anomalies. Suppression patterns consistent with, not Phoenix Fire, and not Dumbledore's precise architecture, but something cruder and more recent and in some ways more immediately infuriating because it had been done to a child whose parents were already gone. "Neville Longbottom," Harry said. Neville stared at him. You're Harry Potter." "Yes," Harry said. "Is your grandmother home?" Yeah, should I get her?" "Please." Neville disappeared from the fire. A moment later Augusta's face appeared, and her expression shifted when she saw Harry crouched at the leaky cauldron's private grate rather than at Gringotts. "What are you doing there?" "Being out," Harry said. "I wanted to talk to you about Neville." A pause. "You found it." "Ragnarok mentioned the secondary flag yesterday morning. I read through the file last night." Harry kept his voice low and even. "There are suppression charms on him. Not as extensive as mine were. But someone put a block on his magical expression. It's targeted at his confidence specifically. Every time he tries magic independently, there's a dampening effect that makes it feel like it's not working." Augusta's face in the green flame was very still. "Do you know who?" "The magical signature isn't Dumbledore's. It's older. Family magic." The still face became even stiller, in a specific way. "His uncle Algy," Augusta said. Not a question. The words had the quality of a conclusion reached and now being confirmed. "I don't know that for certain," Harry said. "But the structure of it is, it's not a child's magic. Someone who knew what they were doing put that on him." He paused. "It can be cleared. Not Phoenix Fire, that was specific to what was done to me. But a proper charm removal with a competent cursebreaker would, I know," Augusta said. Her voice was very controlled. "I will handle it." "I know you will," Harry said. I thought you should know before the hearing. I thought you'd want to know." Augusta looked at him through the green fire. "How did you, You've been at Gringotts for 2 days. When did you read Neville's file? Last night. I was reading files. He paused. I read a lot when I can't sleep. Augusta was quiet for a moment. Then, he knows you're calling, you know. He's standing just off to the side trying to look like he isn't listening. Harry almost smiled. That's fine. He can listen. Come to the manor for dinner tonight, Augusta said. Both of you should meet properly. Not through a flue grate. I'll ask Ragnarok, Harry said. Ragnarok answers to the political reality of the situation, not the other way around, Augusta said briskly. Come at 7. The flame went out. Harry stood up, handed the remaining powder back to Tom, thanked him, and walked back into the afternoon light of Diagon Alley, where his goblin escorts were waiting with the patient composure of professionals who had seen everything. He showed up at Longbottom Manor at 7 on the dot, because being on time was a form of respect he decided he was going to practice. Longbottom Manor was not a grand place. It was substantial, stone-built, old, with grounds that had the slightly overgrown quality of a property maintained by someone with priorities other than aesthetics. The family crest was carved above the door, a stone relief of a shield with what appeared to be a badger on it. The door was answered by Augusta herself, not a house elf, which said something. Inside, the manor had the feeling of a house lived in by people who had been through enormous things and kept going. There were family portraits and worn carpets and a dining room that could have held 20 but was set for 3, and in the corridor on the way to the dining room there were framed photographs on the wall that Harry walked past and then stopped and walked back to. A man and a woman. Both in order robes, photographed in what looked like someone's garden. They were laughing at someone off camera, and the woman had her head tilted back, and the man's arm was around her shoulders, and they were just 2 people in a garden, laughing, and that was all, and Harry stood and looked at them for a moment. Frank and Alice, Neville said from behind him. Harry turned. Neville Longbottom was standing in the corridor with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders up in the reflexive curl that Harry recognized from his own recent past, the posture of someone who has learned to take up less space. He was looking at the photograph not with grief exactly but with the steady, habituated ache of someone who has been grieving for so long it's become the background of everything. They look like good people, Harry said. Neville looked at him. Whatever he'd been expecting Harry Potter to say, that apparently wasn't it, because something in his face relaxed fractionally. Gran says Mum laughed at everything. She says she had a way of making difficult things seem like they were going to be all right. That's a good way to be, Harry said. Neville looked at the photograph for another moment. Gran says you found something about my magic. Yes, Harry said. Not hedging, not softening. Someone put a suppression charm on you. It's targeted at your confidence in your own abilities. It's why magic feels like it doesn't work properly when you try. Neville was very quiet. He was looking at the corridor floor, and Harry waited, because this was one of those moments where the waiting was the point. I thought I was just, Neville stopped. Started again. Everyone says I'm not very magical. Uncle Algy tried, he pushed me out of a window once to see if I'd do accidental magic. Harry looked at him steadily. You have your parents' blood, he said. That's 2 of the most talented aurors of their generation. You're not very magical. He paused. Someone made it feel that way. That's not the same thing. Neville looked up. He had his mother's eyes, Harry thought. He'd noticed that from the photograph, and it was strange to see them in a living face, stranger still to see them looking at him with the particular combination of desperate hope and armor-plated caution of someone who has been told they're not enough for long enough that being told the opposite feels dangerous. Can it be fixed? Neville asked. Augusta is arranging a cursebreaker, Harry said. After the hearing Thursday. Yes. They stood in the corridor for a moment, the 2 of them, under the photographs of Frank and Alice Longbottom laughing in a garden, and something passed between them that wasn't talked about but was acknowledged, the specific recognition of two people who have been shaped by other people's decisions and who have found each other in the aftermath of discovering this. Then Augusta's voice came from the dining room, "If the two of you are done being thoughtful in the corridor, dinner is ready." Dinner was a revelation. Not because the food was exceptional, though it was: roast lamb, proper potatoes, something green that Harry ate without being told to because it turned out vegetables had flavor when they were cooked by someone who cared about cooking. The revelation was the conversation. Augusta Longbottom at her own table, eating her own lamb, was a different creature than Augusta Longbottom in a Gringotts negotiation chamber. She was still precise and formidable, but there was something underneath it, a dry, cutting humor that surfaced in her observations about Wisengamot politics, a fierce warmth in the way she watched Neville eat, a directness that felt, in the context of the manor and the worn carpets and the photographs on the wall, less like a weapon and more like a foundation. She told Harry about his parents. Not the story, he'd had the story in documents, but the texture of them, what it was like to see Lily Potter argue a point in an order meeting, the way James had walked into rooms as though he owned them and somehow made you like him for it rather than resent him. She told him about Sirius, too, not the man in the letter, not the man in the file, but the Sirius who had been in rooms with her, who had been reckless and brilliant and genuinely funny and occasionally insufferable in the way of people who know they're charming and haven't yet decided whether to use it responsibly. Neville listened to all of this with the quality of someone storing information he might need later. "What was Pettigrew like?" Harry asked, during a pause. Augusta considered this with more care than she gave most things. "Unassuming," she said finally. "Anxious. The kind of person who makes you feel a little sorry for them without quite knowing why." She cut a piece of lamb. "That is, I understand now, probably not accidental. People who learn to seem harmless are difficult to suspect." "He faked his own death," Harry said. "Cut off his own finger. The explosion, the bodies, 12 people, to create a distraction, and then just, gone. Into a rat. He thought about this. The planning it required. The specific, coldly rational decision-making. He's not a foolish person." "No," Augusta said. "He was never a foolish person. He was a frightened one, which is considerably more dangerous." After dinner, when Augusta had gone to make tea and left them in the sitting room, Harry and Neville sat for a moment in the comfortable quiet of the manor. The fire in the grate was real, wood burning, and it made the room smell like autumn. "Can I ask you something?" Neville said. "Yes," Harry said. "What are you? I mean, I've read the papers, Gran showed me the notification about the hearing, and she told me a bit about the Gringotts stuff, and," he stopped, organizing himself. "What are you going to do? After Sirius gets out?" After all of it." Harry looked at the fire. "Live," he said simply. "Go to Hogwarts. Learn properly. Figure out Voldemort." Neville flinched slightly at the name and then caught himself flinching and looked annoyed about it. "You're really not scared of him?" "I'm scared of some things," Harry said. "Not of him. He's a man who split his soul apart so he wouldn't have to die, and now he's, not dead but not alive either, drifting somewhere." He looked at the fire. "I'm more concerned about the people who were around him than about him specifically. The ones who are still out there. The ones who passed everything off as acting under the Imperius curse." He paused. "People like that don't just stop." "Malfoy," Neville said. It sounded like he'd been holding the word a while. "Among others," Harry said. Draco Malfoy is going to be in our year at Hogwarts," Neville said. "He used to come to my birthday parties when we were very little. Before everything. His father came with him once and I remember," he stopped. Looked at the fire. "I remember my parents looking at Lucius Malfoy in a way that I didn't understand when I was 4 but understand now." "How did they look at him?" Harry asked. "Like something they were keeping their hands away from," Neville said. Harry thought about that. Stored it. Neville, he was realizing, noticed things, quietly, without drawing attention to the noticing. He watched and remembered. Under the suppression charm, that quality had been turned inward and used against him, all that observation directed at his own failures and limitations. Without the charm, Harry thought, it might become something rather different. Augusta came back with tea and shortbread and they talked until 9 o'clock, when she firmly sent Neville to bed. Thursday is 2 days away and you will need sleep, the both of you, and don't argue with me, Harry, I can see you calculating, and then sat with Harry for another hour while he drank his second cup and they went over the hearing structure one final time. Before he left, transported back to Gringotts via a private fluke connection that Ragnarok had established to the manor, Augusta put something in his hand. A photograph. His parents, again. But a different one from the corridor, this one taken indoors, somewhere warm. His mother was sitting with a baby on her lap, and his father was leaning over her shoulder, and the baby was grabbing at his father's hair with the enthusiastic competence of someone who had only recently discovered that hands could do things, and both his parents were laughing. I've had that since 1981, Augusta said. I was saving it for the right time. Harry looked at the photograph. The baby in it had his mother's eyes and his father's hair and seemed deeply pleased with the situation. He looked up at Augusta. She was looking at him with an expression that she immediately organized back into something more contained, but he'd seen it. Thank you, he said. She waved a hand. Get some sleep. Thursday. Harry woke early, dressed in the formal robes that Ragnarok had arranged, dark, well cut, the Potter crest on the left breast, the family colors of deep red and gold, and ate breakfast standing up because sitting felt impossible. He was not nervous exactly. He was the particular state before a big thing where all of your energy is organized and waiting and the body doesn't know what to do with itself. He took the photograph of his parents and put it in his inside pocket. Then he went to find Ragnarok. The delegation from Gringotts to the Wisingamot was formally constituted for the first time in 32 years. Ragnarok had explained this the night before with a quality of controlled satisfaction. Goblins had not sent a formal delegation to the Wisingamot in living memory, as the institution had, in Goblin assessment, not warranted the dignity of their attention. Sending one now was a statement, and Ragnarok made that statement with 3 senior wardmasters in formal dress, 2 legal representatives, and himself at the front, walking into the ministry with the unhurried certainty of people who know that the building's foundations are partly their work. Harry walked beside Ragnarok. Augusta was already inside. The Wisingamot chamber was smaller than Harry had imagined and larger than he'd expected, not a contradiction, just the way spaces are when you finally see them after building them in your head. Tiered seating, curved in a horseshoe, 50 or so witches and wizards in plum-colored robes. At the far end, the elevated central bench where the chief warlock presided. Dumbledore was already there. He looked exactly as he had in the Gringotts chamber, tall, silver-bearded, unhurried. He had the particular quality of a person who is performing composure because their composure is genuine but they know everyone is watching for cracks in it. He looked at Harry when Harry came in and his expression did what it had done in the negotiation chamber, something quick and recalibrated, a man adjusting to a reality he keeps encountering fresh. Harry took the seat Augusta had arranged for him, at the petitioner's table to the left. Ragnarok sat beside him. Augusta stood at the advocate's podium, her vulture hat at what Harry had come to recognize was its full formal battle angle. The room filled. Voices quieted. Dumbledore called the session to order. The emergency motion of the House of Potter, Dumbledore said, requesting a Wisingamot review of the imprisonment of Sirius Orion Black, filed under the emergency provision, Clause 14, supported by documentation from Gringotts Bank. The floor is open to presentation. Augusta began. She was good at this. Harry had expected her to be good but she was better than that, she had the gift of making the most complex legal argument feel as inevitable as gravity, each point placed with the precision of someone laying stones across a river, and by the time she reached the third section of her presentation, the room had gone from the restless professional attention of people sitting through a process to the particular quality of attention that means something real is being heard. She laid out the timeline. The death of the Potters. The deployment of Sirius Black to pursue Pettigrew. The explosion on Mallet Street. The direct commitment to Azkaban, no arrest processing, no holding cell, no legal counsel, no trial. She named Bartemius Crouch as the minister who had authorized the commitment. She named the date. She cited the Wisengamot Charter provision requiring trial within 40 days of arrest, which had been systematically ignored. Then she produced the Gringotts documentation. The room shifted when the vault access logs came out. The will, the voice reading the relevant passage aloud had a clarity that left no interpretive room. The specific clause, Harry James Potter is not to be placed under the care of Petunia and Vernon Dursley under any circumstances. Several Wisengamot members were looking at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was looking at the documentation with the face of someone who has accepted that a moment is happening and has decided to ride it rather than resist it. The petitioner calls for a full review of the commitment order and requests that Sirius Orion Black be brought before this body, Augusta said. Supporting testimony has been provided in written affidavit by Gringotts Bank, who confirmed the original documentation of the case and additionally confirmed that the magical artifacts used to navigate these waters have left evidence consistent with deliberate and systemic compulsion of bank officers over a period of 6 years. She turned to look at Dumbledore directly. The petitioner requests the Chief Warlock's ruling on the validity of the original commitment. Dumbledore was silent for a moment. The whole room was watching him. Harry was watching him. And Harry saw it, the precise moment when Dumbledore made his calculation. Not an uncomplicated calculation and not a fast one. The old man sat with it for 5 seconds that felt considerably longer, and in those seconds Harry could see the weight of 52 years sitting on him. Then Dumbledore said, "The Wisengamot will take a 30-minute recess. When we reconvene, I will render the Chief Warlock's finding on the validity of the original commitment." He paused. "Lady Longbottom, I would ask that you make no additional motions during the recess." "Of course," Augusta said, with a smile that was technically pleasant and actually serrated. The room broke into voices. Harry sat still. During the recess, Harry stayed at the petitioner's table. Several Wisengamot members walked past and looked at him with varying expressions, curiosity, assessment, a few with something warmer. 2 of them nodded. One older witch with sharp eyes and a Scottish accent stopped and said, "Minerva McGonagall. I will be your head of house at Hogwarts, Mr. Potter." "I look forward to it," and moved on. Ragnarok leaned over. McGonagall is the one member of the Hogwarts staff who has consistently filed independent reports about student welfare violations at Dumbledore. All her reports were filed and then formally set aside. "I noticed the name in the documentation," Harry said. "Did you read all of those files?" Ragnarok asked. "I had 3 nights," Harry said. The Wisengamot reconvened. Dumbledore took his seat at the central bench and looked out at the room with the measured composure of a man who has made his decision and is committed to it. "The Chief Warlock's finding," he said, "regarding the original commitment of Sirius Orion Black, the commitment was made in violation of the Wisengamot Charter, specifically clauses 11 and 14, which require trial within 40 days of arrest and mandate legal representation for the accused. As the commitment was procedurally invalid from inception, the period of imprisonment cannot be considered lawful. The Wisengamot is directed to review the evidentiary case for Mr. Black's guilt." The room was not quiet exactly, there were voices, movements, the sound of a large group of people processing something, but Harry wasn't listening to the room. He was watching Dumbledore, who was looking down at the bench in front of him with an expression that was not the warm public face and not the careful calculation of the negotiation chamber either. It was something that looked, from where Harry was sitting, like a man confronting the ledger of himself. The hearing took another 4 hours. The Gringotts wardmasters presented the magical evidence. An Auror, Kingsley Shacklebolt, young and clearly uncomfortable with what he was presenting, confirmed that Peter Pettigrew's death certificate was procedurally incomplete and that a re-examination petition had been filed. 3 witness testimonies, preserved in pensive, demonstrated that Sirius Black had been known in Order circles to have deliberately passed the secret keeper role to Pettigrew. And then they brought Sirius in. Harry had not been prepared for this. He didn't know exactly what he'd been prepared for, something worse than what was in the letter, something hollow and damaged, something that matched what 6 years of Dementors did to a person. What he wasn't prepared for was Sirius black-looking, in some essential way, like himself. He was thin, wrong thin, the kind that comes from poor food and cold over years. His hair was matted. His robes were Azkaban gray and hung off him. There were shadows under his eyes that weren't fatigue but something deeper. And he moved with the slightly careful quality of someone whose body had been unreliable for a long time and who had learned to treat it as a variable. But his eyes, gray, sharp, alive in a way the rest of him was working to catch up to, went to Harry the moment he was brought into the chamber, and something in his face shifted, something that wasn't hope exactly but was in the direction of it, something kindled. Harry looked back at him and didn't look away. Sirius testified for 40 minutes. His voice was rough from disuse but steady, and what he said was the story, the real story, not the constructed one, the story of Peter Pettigrew and the switch and the street and the laughter that the witnesses had called triumph, and that was the worst grief of his life. He said it plainly and without performance, and the chamber was entirely, completely silent. When he finished, Augusta made the final argument. Ragnarok made the Gringotts' position formally explicit. The motion was put. 27-6. Sirius Black walked out of the Wizengamot chamber a free man. Harry was there when it happened, standing when the vote was read, because you stand for things that matter, you don't stay sitting, and across the chamber he saw Sirius's face in the moment the numbers were announced, and the expression on it was something he was going to carry for a very long time. Not the relief, though that was there. Not the vindication. The specific, fractured look of someone who has been underwater so long they've forgotten what air was like and are now breathing it again and are not quite sure their lungs remember how. The chamber was loud with voices and motion, and all of it was distant. Harry worked his way through the crowd, which parted for him, the Potter crest helping, probably, and possibly just the specific quality of someone who is not moving tentatively, until he was in front of Sirius. Sirius looked down at him. He was taller than Harry had imagined. He looked like the photograph on the wall of the corridor at Longbottom Manor, the Order robes, the brightness of him, and also not at all like it, worn thin and carefully moving, and he looked at Harry Potter for a long moment with those living grey eyes. "You said 5 days," Sirius said. His voice was rough and quiet in the loud room. "It was 5 days," Harry said. Sirius crouched down so they were eye level and looked at him for a moment with an expression that was doing several things at once. Then he said, "You look exactly like James." "I have my mum's eyes," Harry said. Sirius laughed. It was a real laugh, short and slightly cracked and entirely genuine, and the sound of it in the middle of the Wizengamot chamber was the most real thing Harry had heard in the past 5 days. "You sound like both of them," Sirius said. "Lily would have, she would have," he stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. "She'd have been so," he stopped again. Harry waited. "Proud," Sirius finished. "Of you." Harry thought about the photograph in his inside pocket, the one of his parents laughing at a baby grabbing hair. He thought about the note that said acceptable loss. He thought about all the things this man had lost in one night 6 years ago and had been paying for ever since. He took Sirius's hand, it was cold and thinner than it should have been, the grip unsteady at first and then not, and said, "There's a lot to figure out still. Pettigrew's still out there. Voldemort's still, somewhere. Dumbledore is, Harry," Sirius said. "I've been in a cell for 6 years. I will solve every single one of those problems tomorrow. Right now he squeezed the hand. "Right now I just want 5 minutes to know this is real." Harry looked at him. "It's real," he said. Outside the Wizengamot chamber, in the long corridor of the Ministry of Magic, Augusta Longbottom was already talking to Ragnarok about the next steps, her hat at its combat angle, both of them laying the groundwork for what came after. In the chamber itself, Dumbledore was talking to Kingsley Shacklebolt in a low voice, and whatever he was saying had the quality of a man issuing instructions with slightly less certainty than he was used to. And at the center of the room, Harry Potter and Sirius Black stood with their hands clasped in the middle of everything that was beginning, and for 5 minutes neither of them said anything at all. Chapter 4, Fires Don't Ask Permission. The house Sirius chose was in Wales. Not Grimmauld Place. Harry had asked about it and watched Sirius's face do something brief and complicated and then said okay, not there without needing the explanation. Grimmauld Place was Sirius's mother and Sirius's childhood and the specific architecture of a house that had been designed, room by room, to make him feel wrong. He was done with houses that did that. The Wales property was a Potter holding, one of several that Harry had discovered in the Gringotts inventory, a smaller place that had belonged to his great-grandmother and hadn't been occupied in 20 years. It sat on a hillside above a village too small to appear on most maps, stone-built, 3 stories, with windows that faced west over a valley and caught the evening light in a way that made the whole house look like it was quietly on fire at dusk. Harry had the keys sent from Gringotts the day after the hearing. Sirius had spent that first night in St. Mungo's recovery suite, not because he was critically unwell, but because Andromeda Tonks had arrived at the ministry within an hour of the verdict and had demonstrated, in a way that brooked absolutely no argument, that Sirius was going to be assessed by a healer before he went anywhere. Andromeda was dark-haired and sharp-eyed and moved with the particular determination of someone who has been waiting 6 years to do something and is now doing it, and Sirius had looked at her and gone quietly, which told Harry something about what they meant to each other. Harry went to St. Mungo's the next morning. The recovery suite was on the 4th floor, and Sirius was sitting up in bed reading the Daily Prophet with an expression of concentrated disgust. The Prophet had run the story, Sirius Black freed, Wisingamot reverses 6-year wrongful imprisonment, with a sidebar about the Gringotts documentation and a third piece about the Potter family vault irregularities that was factually accurate in the way of journalism that has been handed the story rather than investigated it. The editorial line, Harry had noticed, was carefully non-committal about Dumbledore, which told you exactly what the Prophet's editorial board had decided about which way the wind was blowing. They spelled my name wrong in the caption, Sirius said without looking up. They put an extra I in, Harry said, dropping into the chair beside the bed. Sirius. Like a star with a stutter. Sirius looked up, and his face did what it had been doing since the Wisingamot chamber, the thing where it moved between the person he was before Azkaban and whatever 6 years of Dementors had done to that person, the two things occupying the same face and not quite reconciled yet. He looked better than yesterday. Color in his face. Eyes clearer. The thin wrongness of him was still there, but it had the quality of something being actively reversed rather than something static. How are you feeling? Harry asked. Strange, Sirius said. Everything is loud. Colors are brighter than I remember. The food is, he gestured at a half-eaten plate on the side table. They keep bringing me things and I keep eating them and then feeling surprised that I can. He set the Prophet down. The healer says that's normal. Sensory reintegration, she called it. Andromeda is downstairs, Harry said. She arrived 15 minutes ago. She has Nymphadora with her. Something in Sirius's face gentled in a specific way. Dora, he said. She was, for the last time I saw her. She had purple hair because she just figured out she could change it. She has purple hair now too, Harry said. Different shade. Sirius was quiet for a moment. He looked at the window, which showed a grey London morning with the particular texture of a summer overcast. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up, he said. Not with self-pity, just as a statement of fact. 6 years of dreaming about being out and now being out feels like the dream. You're not asleep, Harry said. I know. Sirius looked back at him. How are you doing? You've been running a fairly significant political operation for the last week and you're 7. Almost 8, Harry said. Right. Almost 8. Sirius looked at him with those grey eyes. That's fine then. Completely normal behavior for almost 8. Harry almost smiled. It kept happening around Sirius, the almost smiling, the feeling of something lighter than the last week's concentrated effort trying to break the surface. "I'm fine," he said. "I'm angry about some things in a useful way and he thought about it. I'm figuring out what normal is supposed to feel like. It's taking a while." "Yeah," Sirius said quietly. "Me too." They sat with that for a moment. "I want to tell you about Pettigrew," Sirius said. "Everything I remember about how the switch happened, the timeline, everything. For the legal case." "I want to hear it," Harry said. "But not today. Today you should see Andromeda and Dora and eat the food and," he paused. "There's a house. In Wales. If you want it." Sirius looked at him. "It was my great-grandmother's," Harry said. "It's been empty 20 years. But Ragnarok had it aired out yesterday and there are people going in today too." He stopped. "I just thought. If you needed somewhere that wasn't, somewhere that was yours. Or could be." Sirius was very still for a moment. His jaw did the working thing it had done in the Wisengamot chamber, and then he got it under control, and when he spoke his voice was steady. "Okay," he said. "Yeah. That sounds, yeah." "Okay," Harry said. He stood up. "I'll send the address through Gringotts. When you're ready." He was at the door when Sirius said, "Harry." He stopped. "Thank you," Sirius said. I know it wasn't, the thanks isn't adequate, it's not, Sirius," Harry said. "You're my godfather. I'll see you in Wales." The house in Wales took 2 weeks to become livable in the way Sirius needed it to be livable. Andromeda came 3 days running and transformed the interior with the focused competence of someone who was also, Harry suspected, processing 6 years of guilt about not having been able to do anything. Sirius let her, which was its own kind of healing. Harry came on weekends. The arrangement at Gringotts was temporary. Ragnarok had been clear that Harry needed a permanent residence before the Hogwarts question became formal, and legally he was in Augusta's guardianship, but her manor was not intended as a long-term housing solution for an extra child. The Wales house was the natural answer, and both Harry and Sirius had been circling it carefully for 2 weeks without quite landing. They landed on a Saturday afternoon in early August, sitting on the stone steps at the back of the house with the valley below them going golden in the late light. Sirius had a mug of tea. Harry had finished his and was producing small flames in his palm and letting them drift upward into the warm air, where they extinguished softly. "You should stay here," Sirius said. "I know," Harry said. "I want to be clear that I'm asking," Sirius said. "Not just, floating it. I'm asking." Harry looked at him. "I know that too." Sirius watched the small flame drift up and go out. "Are you going to keep doing that constantly? The fire?" "Probably," Harry said. "It helps me think. Or, it doesn't help me think so much as it stops the energy from going somewhere less productive." What would somewhere less productive look like? Harry thought about what the flame felt like when he was very angry, the deep gold, the total stillness of it, the sense that it was very carefully not being the thing it could be. "I'm not sure I want to find out," he said. Sirius nodded slowly. He drank his tea. The valley went quieter as the light changed. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About the night at Godric's Hollow." "Okay," Harry said. "I knew," Sirius said. Not that Dumbledore had arranged it. Not the October letter. But I knew that something was wrong. The Potters had been in hiding for months and everything was too quiet. The Death Eaters had been too focused elsewhere, there were no movements toward Godric's Hollow, and then there was. He held the mug in both hands. "I told James. I said I thought the secret had been compromised. He said Dumbledore trusted Peter, and he trusted Dumbledore, and he stopped. I let it go. I had doubts and I let it go because James trusted Dumbledore and because Dumbledore was Dumbledore." Harry watched him. And then they were dead, Sirius said. And I went after Peter because I couldn't stand the alternative, which was sitting with what I'd known and hadn't pushed on. He looked at the valley. If I'd pushed harder, you weren't the one who arranged it, Harry said. No, Sirius said. But I'm telling you this because you're going to Hogwarts in 4 years and Dumbledore is the headmaster and you're going to need to. He stopped. Sirius, Harry said. I know who Dumbledore is. I'm not going to let him manage me. I'm also not going to walk in there treating him as the enemy, because that creates a different kind of problem. He looked at the flames in his palm. He backed off at the hearing. He ruled the way he had to rule, but he could have found ways to complicate it and he didn't. That's something. I don't know what, exactly. But something. Something, Sirius repeated, with the specific skepticism of someone who has had more time to be angry. He's a complicated person who did a terrible thing for reasons he genuinely believed were necessary, Harry said. That doesn't make it better. It means I have to understand him rather than just react to him. Because reacting to complicated people without understanding them is how they win. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. You're 7 years old, he said. Almost 8, Harry said. Right. Sirius drank his tea. Right. Okay. The valley went quiet below them. You should stay here, Sirius said again. Yeah, Harry said. I will. The summer became something Harry had never had before, ordinary. Not the false ordinary of Privet Drive, which had been ordinary the way a stage set is ordinary, all the right furniture, none of the substance. This was different. Days with actual shape. Serious cooking, badly at first and then with growing competence. Andromeda visiting twice a week, and Tonks, who was 10 and had a talent for tripping over things that shouldn't have been possible to trip over, and a metamorphmagus ability she deployed with the gleeful creativity of someone who has recently discovered their best party trick. Neville came twice, once with Augusta and once alone when Augusta had Wisingamot business, and he and Harry spent an afternoon on the hillside doing magic and talking about Hogwarts. The morning after that visit, Harry woke early and went to the back steps with the clear sky feeling of a decision that had been forming for several days and had now formed completely. He practiced. He'd been practicing since Gringotts, in the library and in the evenings and in small moments throughout the day. But this was different, deliberate, structured, pushing. He'd read enough to know what he was working with, a Phoenix resonant core, which meant instinctive magic of unusual depth, and the Holly Phoenix feather wand, which amplified and focused it. He knew his magic was strong. What he wanted to know was how strong, and what strong meant, and what the edges of it were. He found the edges were further than he expected. Spells he'd read about and tried experimentally in the Gringotts library came easily, charms that were supposed to require years of practice arrived on the first or second attempt, sometimes the first. The wand was part of this but not all of it. There was something in his magic that was fundamentally intent-driven. He thought a thing and the magic moved toward it, and the precision of the movement was the precision of his intention. Sloppy thinking produced sloppy results. Clear thinking produced something else entirely. He worked on the flame. He'd started with a candle flame in his palm. Now he worked with structure, a flame that could take shapes, hold them, move with intention. He built a globe and held it for 10 minutes, rotating it, changing the internal temperature without changing the external, splitting it into components and reassembling it. He was not doing this for performance. He was doing it because understanding the nature of what his magic was told him something about what it could do in situations he didn't fully know yet. He thought about Voldemort. He'd been thinking about Voldemort in the systematic way he thought about most problems, not with fear, not with obsession, but with the clear-eyed assessment of someone cataloging a threat. Voldemort was not dead. The documentation from Gringotts included monitoring ward information that the Goblin Wardmasters had been suppressing for 6 years, and the relevant entry was dated May 1982 and flagged by 3 separate wardstones: the remnant magical signature of Tom Marvolo Riddle, registered living, location unknown. Living but not present. Weakened to the point of bodilessness but not gone. The Horcruxes, Harry had found references to this in the restricted section of the Gringotts library, which did not have a restriction the way Hogwarts did because goblins considered restriction of information that affected their ledgers to be counterproductive. The books were dark and blunt about it. Soul-splitting through murder, anchors in objects. Multiple anchors. Voldemort had made more than one. This was the real shape of the problem. Not Voldemort currently, floating somewhere powerless. Voldemort eventually, working toward reconstitution, drawn back toward his anchors like a tide toward shore. Every Horcrux was a guarantee of return. Destroy them all and a killing curse finished it permanently. Leave any intact and nothing finished it. Harry knew this. Dumbledore presumably knew this, had presumably incorporated it into the 52-year plan. The difference was that Dumbledore's plan had Harry dying at the end of it as a willing sacrifice, and Harry had precisely no intention of dying at 17, and so the Horcrux problem needed to be solved differently. He pulled the flame globe apart and held the 6 pieces in the air around him, then reassembled it. The precision required was the same precision the Horcrux problem required, identifying each piece, understanding what it was, taking it apart without losing the whole. He needed more information. The Gringotts books gave him framework but not specifics. There was someone who would know the specifics, someone who had known Tom Riddle, who had been shown things. Harry had seen the name in the Hogwarts connection documents. Horace Slughorn. Former potions teacher, retired. Known for his memory of his most accomplished students, known for having given a certain student a certain piece of information about soul-splitting. He needed to talk to Horace Slughorn before Hogwarts. Not threateningly. Carefully. With the specific kind of directness that he'd found worked better than careful management. He filed this under things to do and went inside to make breakfast. August burned into September, and September cooled toward October, and Harry's 8th birthday passed quietly in the Wales house with a cake that Sirius had learned to make from a Muggle cookbook and which was technically correct and tasted of the effort more than the ingredients. Tonks and Andromeda came, and Neville, and Augusta, who ate a small piece of cake and said it was adequate, which Sirius received as a triumph. The Daily Prophet continued to run pieces about the Potterblack case. The coverage had a quality that Harry monitored without obsessing over. The general wizarding public had settled into a narrative that was not entirely accurate but was close enough to be useful. Sirius as wronged hero. Harry as, this was where the coverage got interesting, Harry as something the wizarding world hadn't quite developed language for. He was 7 and had been described by several witnesses at the hearing as, formidably composed, which the Prophet's features writer had turned into a half-page article that used phrases like prodigy and born leader with the slightly breathless quality of journalism discovering something it doesn't have the vocabulary for. Harry found this neither flattering nor concerning. It was information about how the world was reading him, which told him how to move in it. Dumbledore had been largely silent since the hearing. He had published a statement through the Hogwarts office that acknowledged the irregularities in Harry's placement and expressed, carefully, with the full weight of his rhetorical skill, something that walked the edge between apology and explanation without being either. Harry had read it twice, noted that it contained exactly 0 factual concessions, and set it aside. Then in late October, the Hogwarts school governors held an emergency session. This was not on Harry's immediate radar until Augusta came to Wales on a Wednesday morning looking like someone had handed her something sharp, and sat at the kitchen table while Sirius made tea, and said, "The governors want to discuss the Hogwarts headmaster position." Sirius put the kettle down. Harry looked up from the book he'd been reading. "Dumbledore's position," he said. "There's a faction," Augusta said. "Lucius Malfoy has been cultivating relationships on the Board of Governors for years. He's using the hearing, the documentation, the public narrative about the guardianship, he's using all of it to push for Dumbledore's removal." She looked at Harry. "The motion requires a majority of the 12 governors. Malfoy appears to have 7. Harry thought about this. "Dumbledore removed would mean Dumbledore replaced," he said. "With someone Malfoy chose." "Presumably," Augusta said. So the alternative to Dumbledore is worse, Harry said. Potentially significantly worse, Augusta confirmed. Malfoy's preferred candidate, as far as I can determine, is a woman named Dolores Umbridge, who currently works in the Ministry's Magical Creatures Department and whose policy positions would reorganize several of Hogwarts' more equitable admissions practices. Sirius sat down. You're saying Malfoy is using the evidence of Dumbledore's wrongdoing to get rid of Dumbledore and replace him with someone who would do the same wrongdoing but differently and also worse. More or less, Augusta said. Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about Dumbledore's face in the Wizengamot chamber, the calculated decision to rule correctly, the small ongoing evidence that something in the man was still capable of choosing right even when it cost him. He thought about Umbridge. He didn't know the name but he knew the type from the documentation, the smooth institutional cruelty of someone who believed power was the same as justice. We can't stop the governors from moving against Dumbledore, Harry said. It's their right, the evidence is real. But we can make the replacement question politically uncomfortable. He thought for a moment. If the Wizengamot has standing to review the appointment, does it? Under the Education Act of 1952, the Wizengamot must ratify any Hogwarts headmaster appointment, Augusta said. Then we table a condition, Harry said. Any new appointment must pass an independent review panel. Gringotts documentation of any candidate's professional history. Full disclosure of ministry affiliations and positions. He looked at Augusta. Can you table that as a condition of ratification before the governor's vote? Augusta looked at him steadily. I can table it as an emergency rider, she said. If it passes in the Wizengamot before the governor's vote, their choice becomes subject to the condition. How quickly can you get the rider tabled? 2 days, Augusta said. If I call in certain favors I have been saving for the correct moment. This seems like the correct moment, Harry said. Sirius was watching Harry with an expression that he'd been wearing with increasing frequency over the past months, not quite disbelief, not quite pride, something in between that hadn't settled into a single word yet. You're protecting Dumbledore, he said. I'm protecting Hogwarts from something worse than Dumbledore, Harry said. There's a difference. He tried to sacrifice you, Sirius said. The words were flat and specific, nothing heated underneath them, just the fact of it stated. I know, Harry said. And I want full accountability for that. Eventually. Thoroughly. But accountability through the right processes, not Malfoy's opportunism. He met Sirius's eyes. Malfoy doesn't care about what was done to me. He cares about positioning someone loyal to Voldemort's ideology in control of British wizarding education. If I let him use my situation to accomplish that, I've been manipulated again. He paused. Just by different hands. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then, when you're head boy at Hogwarts, I'm going to need a very long lie down. Augusta made a sound that was technically a cough. She was already standing, had at battle angle. I'll have the rider drafted tonight, she said. Harry, I'll need a formal letter of support from you as Lord Potter, since the motion will cite your case as precedent. I'll write it tonight, Harry said. He looked at her. Thank you, Augusta. She waved a hand at him and went. Sirius watched the door close and then looked at Harry. Lord Potter, he said. It's a political title, Harry said. I don't, no, I like it, Sirius said. Your dad would have, James would have, he was doing the jaw thing again. What would he have said? Harry asked. Sirius looked at the ceiling for a moment. He would have said something deeply embarrassing and completely sincere, he said finally, and then he would have ruffled your hair, and Lily would have told him off for the hair thing, and, he stopped. Picked up his tea. He would have been so proud of you. Harry thought about the photograph in his inside pocket. He'd moved it to the nightstand in his room in Wales. He looked at it most mornings. I know, he said quietly. The rider passed the Wizengamot 4 days later, 17 to 11, with Augusta running the vote with the focused efficiency of someone who had been waiting 30 years for this particular moment. The school governor's motion against Dumbledore stalled when Malfoy's count dropped from 7 to 5 upon the passage of the rider. Two governors apparently reconsidered their positions when Gringotts' documentation review became a formal condition of any new appointment. Lucius Malfoy's political machinery was formidable, but it depended on opacity, and opacity was becoming expensive. Harry heard about this from Ragnarok, who reported it with the specific tone of a man watching a chessboard reorganize itself favorably. Then November came, and something happened that Harry hadn't planned for. He was on the hillside above the Wales house, practicing. The day was cold and clear, and he'd been working for 2 hours on precision casting without the wand, not wandless magic in the dramatic sense, just understanding the relationship between his intention and his magic well enough to test where the wand was necessary and where it was a focusing tool rather than a requirement. He'd found it was more of a focusing tool than strictly necessary, which he filed as useful information. He felt Fawkes before he saw him. Not physically felt, nothing touched him. It was the resonance, the connection that lived in his chest since the burning, a warmth that had been background for months suddenly becoming foreground. He turned and the phoenix was there, 20 feet away, perched on a stone with the afternoon light making him genuinely incandescent. Harry hadn't seen him since that night. He'd thought about him, had wondered, actually, where Fawkes was, whether a phoenix who had acted against his bonded wizard's plans could simply continue. The books had been vague on this particular situation, possibly because it was rare. "Hello," Harry said. Fawkes made the singing bowl sound. Softer than on the night of the burning. More conversational. Harry walked over and sat on the ground near the stone, cross-legged, so he wasn't looming or presenting himself as anything. He'd found that with things that were very old and very intelligent, the body language of humility was its own form of honesty. Fawkes looked at him with the amber eyes for a long moment. Then he made a sound that was longer, a phrase rather than a word, if music could be phrased that way. Harry felt it as meaning rather than language. Something like, "You're doing well and also be careful," and also something more complex that was about the future, about things not yet happened, about the shape of what was coming. "Voldemort," Harry said. Fawkes made a different sound. "Confirmation. He's going to try to come back," Harry said. "Soon." The answer was a feeling rather than a time frame, not soon by human reckoning but not distant either. Years. But moving. "I know about the Horcruxes," Harry said. "I know there are multiple. I'm trying to figure out where they are." He looked at the phoenix. "Can you help with that?" Fawkes was quiet for a moment. Then he made a sound that Harry interpreted, with the particular confidence of someone who had been living with this resonance for 4 months, as, "Some things have to be found, not given." "That's fair," Harry said. Another sound. More complex this time, with something underneath it that felt like concern. "Dumbledore," Harry said. "You're still his." The sound Fawkes made was extremely complex. Harry sat with it for a moment, turning it over. It wasn't yes. It wasn't no. It was something more like, "I am my own, and there is still something in him worth watching for." "You think he can choose better," Harry said. "That's why you stayed." The phoenix spread his wings once, slowly, and the light moved through the valley below as though the whole hillside had exhaled. "I don't know if I believe that," Harry said honestly. Fawkes looked at him with those amber eyes. The look said, with the clarity of something that had been alive longer than most civilizations, "You don't have to yet." They sat in the cold afternoon light for a while, the boy and the phoenix, while the valley went gold below them. Winter. Neville came to Wales for the December holidays. Harry had suggested it to Augusta and Augusta had looked at the two of them, at Harry, who was reading everything and practicing constantly and still occasionally woke up at 3 in the morning with the particular disoriented fury of someone whose bones remembered suppression even if their mind had processed it, and at Neville, who had had the suppression charm removed in September by a Gringotts cursebreaker and was currently in the process of discovering what his magic actually was, and Had said yes with the brisk certainty of someone making a good decision. Neville's magic, once unblocked, was extraordinary in a direction no one had quite expected. He was not flashy. He was not the precise, intent-driven power that Harry's Phoenix resonance produced. He was something deeper and slower, elemental, almost, the magic of someone whose connection ran through growing things and living systems and the deep, patient power of things that take time. His spells were rooted rather than flying. His transfiguration was exceptional in a way that went beyond technique into something more fundamental. Augusta had watched him turn a stone into a thriving plant in under 4 seconds and had gone very still and then said, very quietly, "Yes. Your mother's blood," in a tone that meant Frank Longbottom had been a considerable wizard and Alice had been something rarer. In Wales for the holidays, Neville and Harry practiced together in the mornings, not competitively, nothing like that, but in the comfortable way of two people who have found that their different strengths work together well. Harry's instinctive precision and Neville's rooted depth were complementary in the way of fire and earth. They didn't discuss Voldemort much. They didn't need to yet. They were 10 and 8 respectively, and Hogwarts was 3 years away for Neville and 4 for Harry, and the present was full enough. What they did talk about was people. Neville was good at people in a way that Harry found genuinely useful. He noticed the textures of things that Harry catalogued but didn't always fully process. He talked about his grandmother with a complex, fierce love that had no illusions in it, and about his parents with a kind of sustained tenderness that made Harry think about the photographs on Augusta's corridor wall. He talked about the 4 years to Hogwarts with the specific excitement of someone who had been told they weren't magical for long enough that the prospect of a magical education was something more than academic. "What do you actually want?" Harry asked him one afternoon, when they were doing a reading hour that had become a companionable habit, different books, same space, occasional shared observation. Neville looked up from his herbology text. "What do you mean?" "Not at Hogwarts. Not because of Voldemort or, generally. Just. What do you want?" Neville thought about it with the seriousness of someone who doesn't treat the question as rhetorical. "I want to understand living things," he said. "Plants, mostly. The way they work, the magic in growing things, in how they respond to intention and care. I want to get good enough at that I can. I think there are magical plants that haven't been discovered yet. Or plants whose properties haven't been fully understood. I want to find them." He paused. "That probably sounds, it sounds exactly right," Harry said. Neville looked at him. "What do you want?" Harry thought about this. He'd been asked variations of it before, by Ragnarok, implicitly, by Augusta, by Sirius in the way that people who care about someone check in on the direction of their caring. He'd always answered practically. This was the first time someone had asked it with the specific quality of just wanting to know. "I want to understand everything," Harry said. "Not to control it. Just, I want to know how things work. Why people make the choices they make. What magic actually is, not just what it does." He paused. "And I want the wizarding world to be different than it is. Not, I don't have specific legislation in mind. Just. Less afraid. Less stuck." He looked at his hands. "A world where what was done to me couldn't happen. Where a baby can't be shaped into a tool by someone who believes his arithmetic is more important than the baby's life." Neville was quiet for a moment. "That's more than you usually say," he said. "You asked properly," Harry said. Neville nodded, accepting this. He went back to his herbology text. Harry went back to his book. Outside, the Welsh hills were white and quiet, and the fire in the grate burned steady and gold. January brought the letter from Horace Slughorn. Harry had sent a carefully composed note in December, using Augusta's Wisengamot status as a formal frame. "Lord Potter requests the honor of a private interview, regarding a matter of some magical historical significance," and Slughorn had responded slowly, clearly weighing it, and then responded in the affirmative with the quality of a man who has been trying to decide whether to do the right thing for a very long time and has finally decided. They met at a tea room in Diagon Alley, chosen by Slughorn, which told Harry something. Not his home, this was not someone bringing Harry into his personal space. Neutral ground. The choice of someone who was willing to help but maintaining distance. Slughorn was round and rather magnificent in a purple overcoat, with a walrus mustache and eyes that were brighter and more assessing than the rest of his presentation suggested. He had the gift of making everyone he spoke to feel like they were the most interesting person in the room, which Harry noted and treated with appropriate respect. It was a real gift, even deployed strategically. "Mr. Potter," Slughorn said, pouring tea. "You are considerably more present than I expected from an 8-year-old. "I'm told that fairly often," Harry said. "It stops being a surprise." Slughorn laughed, genuinely, the laugh of someone who found the world amusing and was comfortable being amused. "Your mother had that quality," he said. "Lily Evans. Brilliant girl. Best natural potions talent I taught in 30 years. He handed Harry a cup. "Your father had something else. Confidence like a weapon he'd forgotten he was carrying. Quite remarkable." "I need to ask you about Tom Riddle," Harry said. The cup that Slughorn had been about to pick up stayed on its saucer. His face went through something complex and then settled into the expression of someone who has been expecting a specific conversation and had hoped it would come later. "Of course," he said quietly. "I know what Horcruxes are," Harry said. "I know the general principle. I know that Riddle made them. I need to know how many." He met Slughorn's eyes. "I think you know." Slughorn was very still. The tea room around them was occupied by a dozen ordinary people drinking ordinary tea, and the sound of it filled the space between his stillness and Harry's waiting. "He came to ask me," Slughorn said finally. "When he was a student. He was a magnificent student. I don't say that as an excuse. He was brilliant and charming, and there was something behind his eyes that I recognized even then as something that would end badly, but brilliance has its own gravity, and he stopped. I told him how to make them. The theory. I explained that it was possible to make more than one." "How many did you tell him was safe?" Harry asked. Slughorn flinched slightly at the word safe. "I said, in the theoretical discussion, I said that some dark practitioners had attempted as many as 7. He looked at his tea. 7 pieces of the soul. 6 Horcruxes, keeping the 7th in the body." Harry heard this and did not react visibly. He filed it, 6, a number, a problem with 6 components, and said, "Did he say how many he intended?" "No," Slughorn said. "But I have known, for 30 years, that the question was not purely theoretical. That he took the information and, he looked up. What do you intend to do with this?" "Find them," Harry said simply. "Destroy them. Make it so he can't come back, or if he does come back, he can be finished properly." Slughorn looked at him for a long moment. 8 years old, in formal robes, drinking tea across from him with the composed certainty of someone who has thought clearly about an impossible problem. "You're planning for something that's years away," Slughorn said. "I have time," Harry said. "I'd rather use it." "And Dumbledore?" Slughorn asked carefully. "Has his own plans," Harry said. "They're not the same as mine." He looked at Slughorn directly. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you helped create, and because understanding the full picture is better than guessing at it, and because I think you'd like the chance to be useful in the solution rather than just part of the problem." Slughorn blinked. Then he laughed again, shorter this time, but just as genuine. "Lily's son," he said. "Absolutely Lily's son. Can you think of anything else?" Harry asked. "Objects. Things he was attached to. Things with personal significance." Slughorn thought for a long time. He talked for an hour. Harry listened to every word. He walked out of the tea room into the grey January afternoon with 6 pieces of a puzzle and the shape of the whole thing becoming clearer in his mind the way a map becomes clearer when you have enough landmarks. Riddle's diary, mentioned by Slughorn as something Riddle had been protective of in school. A ring, old family magic, mentioned in connection to the Gaunt family. The locket, Slytherin's locket, which Slughorn had mentioned in passing and then looked like he wished he hadn't. The cup, Hufflepuff's cup, connected to the collector Hepzibah Smith whom Riddle had apparently charmed extensively in his post-Hogwarts years. The snake, this was speculation, but something in the documentation of Voldemort's activities and his relationship with the Nagini connection made Harry's instincts fire. And the last, the one that had been in the back of his mind since he'd read the Goblin monitoring report about his own magical signature. The scar. The monitoring report had flagged an anomaly in his magical core signature that the wardmasters, once uncompelled, had noted with very specific language. A foreign magical presence. Not hostile, not active, not large, but present. Something that had been there since October 31st, 1981, and had not been there before. The killing curse had not simply missed. It had done something that the book said was impossible but that the evidence strongly suggested. It had rebounded. And in rebounding, some fragment of Voldemort's soul, blown loose by the impact with Lily Potter's sacrificial protection, with magic that Riddle had not accounted for, had latched onto the nearest living thing. Harry had been sitting 2 feet away. He walked through the January afternoon in Diagon Alley and thought about this with the same clear composure he brought to everything. The scar was a Horcrux. Not an intentional one, Riddle had not planned it, had not meant to sacrifice himself that night, but a Horcrux nonetheless. Which meant that the 7th piece of the solution was Harry himself, and Dumbledore's plan was not entirely wrong in its final destination, just wrong in everything that led to it. He needed to die. Or the piece in him needed to die. These were not the same thing. He stopped walking in the middle of Diagon Alley and stood for a moment while the January crowd moved around him. A woman with a shopping basket gave him a curious look. He didn't notice her. He thought about Phoenix Fire. The burning that had not hurt, that had cleared away wrongness without touching what was right. He thought about Fawkes on the hillside saying some things have to be found, not given, and about I am my own. He thought about the nature of Phoenix Fire and what it burned. He didn't have the answer yet. But he had the question, which was further than he'd been this morning, and he had time. He walked back out of Diagon Alley into the ordinary grey city, and the flame he'd been maintaining in his pocket all day burned steady and constant in his